One, I believe. It's been about a month probably, and the one before that was probably about a month before that. So we're things have happened, come up, kind of slipped into a monthly schedule, but who knows? We'll probably bring it back to bi-weekly.
Yeah. Well, COVID happened, and then birthdays happened.
That was for the last year plus. So COVID never
no,
stopped.
COVID happened personally.
Oh yes, personally, right? Yeah, yeah. Sickness and all that jazz.
Now my house is fighting the flu now.
Oh boy,
I'm not.
that's
Thankfully.
good.
At
For
least
you.
not to my knowledge.
Me too. So, where we are right now is in kind of like a bit of a limbo, if you will, as far as like concrete planning of what the meeting is about and all that. Of course, this entire year has been practically dedicated to discussion of a book. So we've outlined this whole book thing, and the last, let's say, 5 or 6 meetings or something like that,
3 or 4
have been maybe more dedicated to
follow up.
where is this book ending? Like,
Yeah.
where's the capstone of this book? In other words, what is the system that we're trying to use the book to create? So that needs to come into view so that there's kind of a whole arc, like a narrative of this book. It's useful for a purpose.
And when you say system, you kind of mean that loosely speaking, right? Not a regimented set of ideologies or anything like that.
The system.
In fact, that's kind of what we're harping on the entire time. So,
Right, yeah. So we're kind of in limbo, floaty. We've got some. We do want to basically carry on and continue on with the organizational type aspects. In particular, this meta schedule idea, how guilds are actually alive, and how this
following through with the
something
archetypes, yeah.
kills every guild that you try to create, and what that is that it's like expressions get made and they die. They don't get fed back into a cycle, and this is what I think the meta schedule discussion has to kind of dip into, that there's something ongoing that you have to hook the guild into, so that you hook attention and people into that guild, so that there's a recurring like a stack of things to be done, and workflows keep getting added, and it becomes alive in that way. So we really need to kind of, we need this nailed down better, and I'd like to get into, as usual, as always, some thoughts I've had about like the deck protocol, the card game, that kind of stuff. And even if it's just ranting about how freaking difficult it is to maintain a strange loop when you're using static expressions like a card.
right.
There's just weird things that you have to take account of.
I think the struggle that we're facing is baked into our model of the APS itself, where you have the bits and pieces that are coming in from the APS can be treated as both subject, object, and aspect all at the same time, and depending on which combination of things it's contextualized in, that's how it'll land. And so when we throw out a static expression with a particular context out, but reinterpret it back in with a different context, this is where we are having a lot of difficulty as to how do we frame these static objects
Right.
back into something this fundamentally much more abstract and crazy.
How do you leave it open to interpretation?
Right. At the same time.
Because like any particular object that's of importance or significance within a guild, like you said, you can express something about it, people can do something, but then there's a whole other aspect that comes along, aspect of use, and it's coming along finding, say, these artifacts that are discussing a different aspect
In a
altogether,
different context,
and it's
yeah.
like they're not the same, but it's the same object.
Right. So like very crude example is utilizing a desk as or a table as a sitting surface, right? Like the shift in protocol is either. So the shift in protocol could dictate whether the structural integrity of the object is even sufficient for that, right? Because a table is generally not used for heavy objects like people. Just a very crude example. um, as how context changes for a static object.
Right. And weird things can be like, let's say you have a table in a within an environment that's being expressed in some guild terms. Um, that table can be promoted from object to guild. Like there can be a guild formed surrounding that object.
True. For example, it's craft. The craft behind the table, for example, is in its own way a guild.
Right. Yeah, so that's like this weird stuff that everything needs to be like flexible and amorphous kind of.
Right. Amorphous is a good kind of descriptor, good descriptor here, because every time you try to nail down a shape, a morphology to it, there is all these other infinite ways of looking at that.
Mm-hmm. So like in terms of, just really quickly, like the deck protocol or the card game, whatever, we would need a card would have to have some type of symbol. For example, if you outline the outer square of the card, and now it has an outline on it, that means it's representing a guild or something. Or maybe
Right.
that could mean that it's abstracted and that there's more of those
You're
things so you
layering
can
protocols. You're layering protocols as to how to read the card in a particular context.
So that's something we've never got down in a way that kind of deals with this kind of semantics or whatever.
And I think you've tried color coding. You've tried lots of different, and you always stumble into the staticness of it not being transferable to another card. You'd have to copy it, for example, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you have to have weird protocols.
So that just points to how representation is at odds with the dynamic of what is being represented.
Right.
That's all it's that, and that's kind of like the spiritual battle, if you will, where expressions get thrown out into that ether and come back as something not entirely the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But more concretely speaking, it's the APS's attempt to represent the reality expressed by the senses, right?
Mm-hmm. in the moment, especially.
Right, and so it is that struggle of it to find that static representation that it can utilize for the next moment. And now we're seeing a more concrete version of that is spilling out of that realm, and this difficulty of writing cards or putting it into a program or writing down a book to talk about it is like an outpour of that same problem of representation that is already inherent internally.
Mm-hmm.
As moment by moment shifts, context shifts, those representations become obsolete.
Right.
Or in need of evolution.
Yeah, so this is also, we've called this a perpetual bootstrap before.
It's a
whatever's laid down, you've got nothing. You're picking up pieces and then you're reconstructing all the time.
There's nothing that's being written that isn't read, and nothing that's read that's not written, kind of thing. There's a situation in which we find ourselves, so to speak.
Very strange. And of course, so all of this, I mean, it's kind of weird to just talk about that, but this
Well, it's
we're
a pie in
talking
the
about
sky kind of thing right now.
Yeah, it does seem very much like that, but where it comes from is human organization. We need to be doing better. Doesn't matter what your problem is. There's a root causes, and that's this dysmorphism between our model, our mental maps, and representation in the world at large.
I think the basic premises upon which we say we can organize just fly in the face of the mythology that current culture has for organizing. Because and I feel this in like right to the core with how I'm trying to apply the programming principles and how they work out in actual organization context when I at work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what the biggest difference is that in that context, what they keep trying to do is set goals for the future. So always set up a kind of an disposition for anxiety, and then utilize a meta schedule like instinctive way of organizing towards the goals, which are pies in the sky again. And so that's the contrast I see in what we're talking about, in that we're not focused on goals, we're just focused on specifically what's in front right now in the moment. That's what sets the next activity up.
Mm-hmm.
Not a particular goal, but
So
like
like
a
the
particular
meta goal.
context. Right? So there's no reference to the dream outside of what had already happened in the record of commitment. So it's in the past. So one is concentrated into the future and is anxious. The other is more reserved, and rather than becoming the other side of it, of course, is to dwell on the past and regret.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So instead of doing a regret, it's more of an assessment of what has transpired. So it's a little less attached, if you will. By a little, I mean not at all attached in comparison.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
Because regret only serves to feed anxiety. Goals are set based on failures.
So I think you're trying to lead into this psychology, I guess, of meta scheduling,
Yeah.
in that the way that corporations are typically doing it is with the psychosis and neurosis side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's all machine-like. It's a machine-like stack. Context is generally never reassessed. It's just you do the next thing that the boss told you to do.
Context is reassessed, but it's always reassessed in terms of profit.
Right.
Not needs are secondary. The demands are.
If the company's good, it's reassessing for profit. Oftentimes, it's not. It's like coasting towards
Oftentimes,
death.
it's to funnel the funds into a small number of pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Yep.
but that's a given. Anyway, now, heart of the guild.
The beating heart of the guild. Yeah. Yeah, so that's what we want to paint the picture that today hopefully we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Something alive, and this should inform Portal Mountain itself as a guild. As to what does it need to look like to participate in Portal Mountain organization.
In programming, we call this eating our own dog food.
Yeah, why is it so goddamn hard? I mean, yeah, we're building something out of whole cloth, ground up, which doesn't exist.
I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of an actual tribe with the kind of mentality that we are following at the same time. Because what that does is reinforce and encourage. And here we are.
I disagree.
Once upon a month, here we are just encouraging each other. So
Yeah.
I mean, thresholds. I'm talking about
I
thresholds.
hear your point, but I personally, I think we have that willingness. There's people. We've got people.
Who we don't know.
And what I think is the main problem is there's no form of expression. There's no organizational expression. It's like, okay, I want to help. What do? Crickets.
Well, as far as expression go, you pretty much know I've taken the baton on creating a language for it. So we do have.
And I want to implement the language in an organization with a beating heart.
So we do have language. You're welcome. Sorry, I'm just tooting my own horn here. I know. It's kind of fun. Just
Fun. It's a long road. I know there's frustrations involved.
well, especially it being its own language, it's ripe for pre-cooperation, if you will.
Yeah.
The fact that we are the fact that we are appropriating terminology does not prevent them from being pre-cooperated from the beginning and also being
No,
driving.
But I think the
false
hope,
narratives.
the hope is that if your language is robust enough, that if it's misappropriated, let's call it,
It will be
that the
obvious.
language is available to describe the exact process of misappropriation.
Yeah,
That would
that's
be
kind of like what the goal actually would be. Hence all the elaborate discussion on the charlatan. Hence all of the
Right.
discussion regarding artifacts and where they fit in and how their representation gets skewed. And again, back to this discussion about psychosis and neurosis, where the real latch to narrative happens, how the charlatan utilizes even that to make a nature-like meta schedule that is completely off course and again alienating even at that depth, right? Because all of these methodologies in the corporation are making people feel like, oh, they're part of something, but that part of something is still this pie in the sky kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. Profit for some far off, unknown people.
And even if when
That's the
they're
point of life.
and even when they're known, it's a mirage, right? Like you can't know your CEO as a person. Like that doesn't work. They still have like feudal like control over the entire operation. Hey, do I buy the food today?
Oh, I'm gonna die.
Why?
Oh, just funny thinking about money.
No, if you can't, you can't. I'm just asking.
I've recently been working on this project. It's like keepsake boxes or jewelry boxes, whatever they call them.
So you splurged?
I did spend a few hundred on R&D recently, and I'm pretty much, that's my spending for the month.
Okay.
pretty well. I mean, it's possible. We can't starve. We're not gonna starve today, but yeah, I'm actually hoping this month, by the end of the month, to cut out and finish, I don't know, at least a set of them. I don't know, what is a set, how many, 5, 10, and then put them on like Etsy marketplace, whatever, and just wait for the cash to roll in.
You're better off trying to make a knife or something.
Fuck no.
Like those videos.
No, I'm doing what nobody else can do, and I know it.
Are you doing the whole no glue stuff?
That was the idea, yeah. I'm not using
Nice.
any. I mean, the boxes are 2-part. The gravity box, you've seen it? It's 2-part. One just like slowly slides down, the lid slides down. But I'm gonna have magnetic catch latches on there too. Velvet bottoms snapped in. Yeah. Yeah. I've been engineering the crap out of it so that I don't have to do a lot of work myself. I just want to slap it together, finish it, and it's gone. Right? I don't want to have to do a lot of anything, sanding, any kind of bullshit.
So, how about we take the idea of heartbeat in manual work like you are experienced in, and try to describe our tribe, if you will, as a context for the heartbeat. Because it's easier to imagine primitive activity as a driver for what's next. What's done, what's next, what's done, what's next.
Sort of, yeah. This makes me think of, like, if we're calling our Porta Mountain lobby and people like our tribe to be, tribe to be.
Well, it's all abstract. It's all absolutely abstract. There's no tribe. There's no concrete tribe that we're talking about. The word tribe is to signify a kind of unity in a mental in a mental makeup, right?
So it makes
We're
me
one
think
body.
of
Extended family, maybe.
it makes me think of family.
But people here don't even have that kind of bond with family anymore.
Right, but so what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to say is that for us to have this meta schedule thing, that means we don't just get together to do this goal and that goal and that goal.
Right.
When we get together, we are the whole sum of our parts. What do our parts need? Period. There's no like
Goal.
pie in the sky goal to do this or that. It's when people come together as a tribe, as a family, it's like,
Yeah.
now we have needs. The needs are the context is bubbling up. The demand is coming.
We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to shit, starting from there.
Right. So it's really it's more than just like starting up a company or treating Portal Mountain like a business or something like that. It's like
It's life.
uh,
It's giving a membrane to a particular living space.
and it's like I'm being reminded of like talk about like the gift economy and that kind of stuff. Like this is where when you're part of this, boundaries like that kind of
Stop existing.
yeah, like, oh, you did this, well, you didn't help me enough, so I'm not going to do that, or this and that.
A great example, I think, comes from Vicky's experience as a kid when she could, you know, well, and also the jarring experiences when it didn't work out, where she was describing things like being as a kid being able to go to anybody's house
Yeah.
and just like, you know, if they were hungry or something, there was zero issues with the kid grabbing a bite to eat or anything like that, even though it wasn't their house. It was just like this kind of
Right.
understanding
Yeah, it's
across
very-
everybody.
Very
that-
beautiful relations this type of relationship has gone away in
Yeah.
society.
And the jarring experience she had when she had when she met, I guess, her white
Right, about-
relatives,
Paint or something.
and grabbed a cookie without permission and was reprimanded for it, and just couldn't grasp what the hell was going on. And to this and to this day, when she speaks of the story, it was like, how do you even consider keeping food away from children like that? It just boggles the mind, right?
Right.
And
yeah, it's
here
just-
we are coming from that perspective to begin with, never having to hearing somebody talk about just freely grabbing food anywhere where it's available. And it's probably, I don't know about you, but I'm like, when I was reading that, I was like, oh wow, I didn't even know people did that, right? Like to that extent. My entire living experience has been the opposite of that. So I found that incredibly interesting and motivating, actually, to think about this tribal
it's
structure.
weird. It really
that we're talking
illustrates
about.
this divide.
Yeah. Like, I'm motivated by that to make sure that the structure that we are talking about is by definition as free and accommodating as that, and not just for little children, like everyone who is
Right.
in the boat.
And it's sort of like a question of how to make it happen, because right away you have people in the back of their minds at least saying, well, What about the saboteur who is literally there to destroy what abundance there is? Like they just want abundance to go away, right? There will be people like that for various motives, because essentially they want, and this is throughout history, they want to enslave in some way, make dependent, right? That's the only reason you would fuck with abundance,
well,
right?
Well, they also imagine that those people will have more power in that context than they actually would, because the thing is that you have a saboteur in a space where everybody is in on helping each other. The saboteur gets ousted.
Pardon me. You do notice.
And that saboteur will essentially cause his own exclusion from activities, not by anybody else's decisions, not by, like, say, imprisoning them or whatnot, but by not being able to cooperate. So their actions will cause their own effects. So when it comes to that discussion, I think what's missing is the element. The discussion always hinges on the idea that without an overarching authority, people have no capacity to respond to bad players. But that's not the case. That's never been the case in places where there's been no authority, because if that was the case, those places wouldn't exist. Like, for one, like, that's just the obvious to get it out of the way, but for others, it's like, why wouldn't people respond to it? They are being shat on, they will respond. And those saboteurs are fewer and far in between than the people who cooperate. So the amount of power that they can actually withhold from other people is very, very, very limited in that circumstance.
It's such a weird problem. But essentially, this is why we acknowledge and express coherence as a thing in groups, in guilds. Coherence is a thing.
Especially when coherence is the DNA of the entire structure. When you have something incoherent, it's fucking bloody obvious. Everybody's moving one way and there is a certain problem going on. There is potential for response. It doesn't have to be imprisonment. It doesn't have to be the anvil of justice from an authoritative structure. It just has to be a change in interaction.
Right.
The opportunity to fuck people over can be diminished. And the need to do so also. What reason would these saboteurs have? They're not going to get much out of it.
Well, especially if you consider like the idea of a web of trust, that people can trust each other and spread word about things or events happening and kind of sign off, if you will, like, I witnessed this happening, kind of thing. If that kind of information can spread,
and tribes are small. They're not like billions of people big.
Right.
With that.
Cool. All right. We'll be right back. Tackling what?
So the question was, what happens when you have a bad player? So I'd like to set the context of the tribe itself.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about the tribe, I never meant the composition of it to be a composition of what I, in my head sounds really funny, is rinky-dink civilized individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not discussing a bunch of civilized individuals getting together, not knowing their own face from their own ass, trying to do tribe. We're talking about self-sufficient, for the most part, people cooperating. So this is key. They're all self-sufficient, strong, self-sufficient, capable people.
That's a tall order.
It is. Always was. There is no way to bootstrap this without being self-sufficient and strong and capable. So we're talking about a bad player in a context of where every single individual person can handle themselves. Right? What is this person going to do? He's going to come up into a fucking brick wall of resistance.
Well, what is that?
But do you know what I mean by that? Like, there's a significant what do you call it? There's a significant what would you call this? Block or barrier? Yeah, barrier. There's a significant barrier for not well-meaning individual in this context, because he's going to come across people who can and will resist. So the thing about those individuals too, like statistically speaking, they prey on the weaker they prey on weaker people.
Right.
It's a tale as old as time. The victim of a crime is almost always significantly less capable of defending themselves than the perpetrator. That's not an accident. And here we're talking about very capable people.
True. Okay.
By definition.
So, good point. Good point.
So that's the main issue to put to bed there. So if that's the first criticism, then that's the response. They have a hell of a fucking time trying to sabotage anything.
Well, not to mention the other thing we've hammered on so much is that capitalism isn't something that needs to die. The capitalist mode of production does not need to die. It doesn't need to go away. In fact, what we do looks like that. But it's because that's the plateau we're utilizing for something to emerge at yet another higher level.
Sure. I think
so, what I'm saying is we're not a target by default. We're not supposed to be. That's one
there's
of the
not
ideas.
much to sabotage anyway. There's not much to sabotage. It's like trying to sabotage the ability to sleep, eat, and shit. Like, literally. That would be what the target would be, which is something we already do, so why would that be a target? Or any further target for I guess exploitation is the reason.
Mm-hmm.
What's that you got
Do
there?
have lights.
What's that you got there?
Well, it's we've got our introduction out of the way, I think.
It's time to
think we
get
can
one with nature?
Kick it up a gear.
Get one with nature?
Yep. Become one with everything.
With the resonance wake.
Which
is not you. And yeah, and the other goal you could say of the organization is to take the notion of resonance wake from the abstract and act upon it in the concrete sense, right? So, if the painting of the reality that we've been creating is that of ephemeral resonances, loading up stacks with potential energy and dissipation over and over and over, and that's what's resonating across the spectrums of layers, over the different layers. From that perspective, right, the organization that we're trying to establish, or the protocols that you're trying to get into and find some kind of representation for, would be ones that deal with surfing, if you will, on this resonance wake, as opposed to concretely specifying artifacts from within it and extracting
Right.
them and mining them.
And so that kind of sounds to me like operating at an emergent layer and not getting bogged down by the details of a layer below. Kind of.
It's subsets, but you don't get bogged down by them because they're isomorphic. The details of the layer below don't matter as much when they are already established in their isomorphism.
Right.
So that means having the correct method place.
But any expression, you can't just say, "Oh, this artifact is isomorphic." It's like it's because of the protocols that you're running that make that acknowledge and utilize the isomorphism.
Mm-hmm. So even the isomorphism itself is emergent. It's not a given.
Right.
So that's the goal of said organization, is to ride the waves of, or the wakes of resonance skillfully, masterfully. Membership in the surf club.
And by waves of resonance, you're just talking about energy potential building into stacks that one has access to.
Right, so we're talking grammatical stacks, we're talking grammatical capacities within the stacks. Power being a function of niche, all of that. So niche speaks to a collection of layers that one can translate protocols between, right? And you see niches in things like convergent evolution, when body shapes take on recurring forms, recurrent templates in the higher level layers, despite being made up of different lower layer bits. So bats and birds converging on wings, and pterodactyls before them, right? Like different wings, different kinds of wings, but convergence on the same idea. Or crocodilian shape types.
You're right.
For swamplands. So yeah, a power in this case. For example, here's an idea of how to understand power. Take a dolphin and take a fish. Right? Dolphins are a mammalian species that has been on land and then turned back into the water and worked out there. Dolphins communicate with clicks, ticks, all of that kind of stuff, live in pods. They have a tribal sort of structure to them.
Yeah.
To some extent. And, tackle layers that fish generally don't engage in whatsoever.
Yeah.
And yet still being able to swim in the same space, in the same spot, having the same body type. So power speaks to if you have two stacks like fish and the dolphin, for example, the dolphin has more power since it tackles more layers that the fish does not, even though the physical
it's
manifestation looks almost
its internal existence maps
to a higher degree
different nuances and niches.
Yeah, so all of the representation of its own pod that lives in its brain, for example, that doesn't exist for a fish. that is a tapping into a layer that the fish doesn't have.
Yep.
And so even though physically it's not visible, there is a difference in what we call power. The power of the dolphin is far greater.
Right. Fish would have like some reflections of that like schooling behavior, but not really a bond between any particular fish.
Well, a fish responds to the movements of the fish in front of them. Generally, when it comes to
It still is
it's
an organizational pattern.
it is, but it doesn't reflect the kind of collective intelligence that a pod of dolphins would exhibit.
Yeah.
Where they would speak to each other and navigate that too, right? Not just the movements, but also the speech.
I'm good.
Me too.
Oh yeah.
And with that,
No. What do you mean with that?
I gotta go. I haven't eaten today, so it's just going through me.
Oh, I see. So,
Be right back.
Burbs.
Burbs.
Holy crap, we're back.
I was just thinking about like the whole.
We're getting our burritos.
Well,
Teamwork.
I was thinking about what you said when you said, "Oh, what's a tall order," and that's actually
That people be responsible.
well,
Yes, it is.
not just that people be responsible, but even like to have a
Self-sufficient
physical,
was the word.
physical emergent guild, right? You already have to have those self-sufficient people. So even as the smallest possible physical manifestation of the guild
Yeah.
requires an incredibly what you said is a tall order.
Like, you
The-
have
the-
to have that inkling that you are responsible for the environment,
And not just
and you're
inkling.
going to do something about it.
Not just inkling, but like a full-on.
But yeah, the tall order, that's why even an inkling you can work with, but like some people don't even have that. Most don't even have that, it seems. Or don't understand what it is. Maybe if they could hear language that spoke better about it, they would understand that actually my life could be a lot better in any domain that I focus on.
There's definitely that aspect of it, but really, I think the takeaway, the very 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 core takeaway from your point about that is you're not gonna be able to get again a rinky dinky implementation of the guild like in
Yeah.
any capacity.
It does
just
have
not,
like that kind of all or nothing feel, and this
Yeah.
this kind of also describes, I think, well, why, like, Anders and I, for example, working on this type of stuff for years and years and years, it was always like it's
And
almost
it's
you feel alone in a way. Like, am I the only one? Well, okay, now I have faith in humanity because I've seen one other person at least who is reflecting this like kind of deep responsibility and this insatiable
Mhm.
curiosity to just learn more about what you can do.
Yeah. And to find somebody like that is very much just driving and driving and driving only at that.
And
So
like,
those are for few
even
and far in
communities,
between.
a community like SOTS, which is based off of like a lot of kind of really deep contemporary issues about around representation, all that like we're talking about. You find like
It's still a pie in the sky
most people are not
or
are
castle
not are not self-directed in a
driven
way.
way. And it's not fair to say that the most people are different than us. I can't say for certain that I have a greater capacity for
It's
it.
a special type of
The
self-directed.
the problem I face, I'm sure you're facing it too, is that for every step you take in this direction, the amount of resistance,
Well,
in a general sense, not even direct resistance, but
as
in
soon
general.
as you try to organize,
Yeah.
as soon as you try to even expression,
Yeah,
even
it's
on your
always
own.
leave me alone.
Yeah.
I have enough to deal with, leave me alone. And that's not an accident either.
Right? Yeah, like I don't want to try put blame on people, and that's why I want to try have a bit of nuance on that.
This position.
Yeah,
It is not something that we're saying that we are immune to. It is simply the way the problem is presented,
like
even,
when I
even
say
to us.
a special type of self-driven, like people can be entrepreneurs and corporate. You're within this operating. Your limits are within this system. The
Yeah.
capitalist mode of production.
Being driven does not prevent you from being in a psychosis and in neurosis.
Right.
We want to.
And I think a lot of people do have a really positive drive, inner kind of just.
Well, those are misdirections, right? From immersion and.
But I mean, like,
presence.
let's say a love for life and living, and that you have the curiosity and drive to learn
All
what's
right.
around you.
So that, if we're to bring it back to our modeling and stuff like that, that is strictly this. It's immersion and presence. So that love is a quality, and that's part of immersion. Qualities are what you're immersed in, right? Moment by moment by moment. Oh
Mhm.
shit.
Right? What?
I actually mixed it up again. Immersion is in the dream, not by moment.
Yeah.
So presence.
You said that before. I was getting it. Yeah. But immersion as a thing, like this feeling that you would be in as a part of your story.
Yeah. Yeah, immersion is like the knowledge that there is a narrative without it being an identifier for yourself, right? It's more like present, but in a collective sense of moment to moment to moment to moment.
I don't think we've
Immersed.
really discussed the term immersion.
It's new.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you just brought it.
It's new, and it comes from me thinking about psychosis and neurosis and trying to understand. What would you don't leave the dream even if you are aware of it? So what would that look like? What would the counter bit be to being not in a psychosis, not trapped in the dream, but sort of like
Right.
seeing it for what it is.
But it's not.
So
You
being
mean it's not an
immersed.
escape.
Right.
It's
So
not that you leave.
you don't
the
leave.
world.
You're immersed in it. You see it for what
It's
it
not
is.
like you suddenly become unaware of all the narratives around you.
Yeah. And the second one was, well, how do you the neurosis part is the latching on, right? Like, well, what does the not latching on but still connecting to it look like? And that's presence. It's being present
just being
in what's happening.
existent, apparently without a goal.
Yeah, like there's no
Without a
conceit calculation.
typical goal.
There's
Like,
no
what am I getting
feeding
from
back.
this? Or, like, well, what punishment am I avoiding? That's why I'm here.
Yeah, like those bits go back into the affect and into the altruistic sort of state where you give
Right.
empathy to only the fact of the narrative, and the rest is artificial.
So we are talking about organizational structures and their meta-narratives and the difference between the, let's call it capitalist meta-narrative, psychotic, neurotic, versus a guild-style organizational meta-narrative of immersion and presence.
The real difference is in the goal. Whereas the
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were talking about that earlier too. That's
where it takes that immersion and presence and pushes it towards a psychosis and a neurosis towards next anxiety.
and the goal is
Another
always
pie in
the
the
goal is
sky.
in terms of a commodity.
Well, it's an abstraction. It's to realize some abstract idea and to chase that.
Right, but
bone.
what I mean is it's always
Yeah, it's
an
for
agreed
profit.
upon product with certain specifications.
Yeah.
That's what the goal is, always that. And it turns out that these just link together to as a profit machine, right? You don't understand the details. You can't understand the details of any particular part of it because it's all the obfuscated meta-narrative, right, at play here. This is where goals can differ. A goal,
I have a metaphor that
a
I've
meta
been-
goal is different
I
from
have a
that.
metaphor for describing why you don't find the system to be in need of self-organizing to do what it does, and why it can be completely self-unaware to produce the amount of garbage that it does. Because
Right.
every component of it is set to produce garbage, right? It's not like they have to truly coordinate amongst themselves as to how that full-on garbage pile is dumped back.
Garbage isn't
So-
the
so-
goal. Garbage is an externalization.
Sure,
That's
but
not cared for.
But my point is that there is a very very distinct conspiratorial narrative of like the system being
Yeah.
this organized thing, and here's my point against that. My point against that is that it doesn't need that coordination amongst itself because its end result is always this sludge, and when that sludge connects to itself, it just becomes more sludge, and so it's
Yeah.
it just
but,
happens to be
dude,
looking
now think
like
about it.
like
That's
it just looks
because-
like a conspiracy to dump shit on people, but that's not because it's a conspiracy. It's just that the net result, it's so much easier to produce this garbage that you don't need to even coordinate any of it.
Okay.
That's kind of where
Capitalism, the capitalist mode of production, is a plateau.
yeah
The only reason it can be like a plateau is because it's formed out of this amorphous goo, like you were saying on the drive-in. every plateau that's formed seems to be just a plaster that can be molded in at another layer, like the primitive technology trees.
Yes, yes.
That's what I see out of that. Of course, it doesn't need to be a grand unifying conspiracy of some dude like I'm
Oh yeah.
gonna conspire to do
This
this.
isn't to say that there's
Every
tiny conspiracies inside of that.
You didn't fully, of course,
But they're
that's
not
fine.
connected.
This isn't even a discussion hardly.
They're just not connected or
What
organized.
what
in any way.
makes this goo is the grains of sand that you're formed together. What those grains of sand are is the ego operating through conceit to accept simple calculations such as, do I get rewarded?
Yeah, I only actually said.
Do I get rewarded? Yes. Okay, I'll do it.
I only actually said
Period.
this.
That's how it all comes together.
I only actually said this to ensure that when it comes to model speaking, there is specific reasons why we don't take on this mode of looking at things. Like there is no organized system.
This would
because
be
that
related.
because the only organization it has is it's in unified garbage output.
Now
And you don't need to coordinate that. It's just garbage pouring out in different places, and it just happens to look like a conspiracy of the same problem.
Now,
it's caused by the same problem, so it looks like it's coordinated.
Classes are real. The priest class is real, in a sense that they have a model, a mapping of this, which is operating at a higher emergent level, and it would make sense for them to be aware of certain things.
But
when you're a capitalist, essentially, think. Okay, let me put this another way, a more milder way.
All right.
Capitalists are the exception, and most of us are just sheep, quote unquote, along, just being pushed along. Most of us do not control capital to make capital. We don't own capital. That's
not argued.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, and I'd like
it's
to
a minority class that is the capitalist.
I'd like to top it off that while they do operate from a different context, the lot of it is through neglect. So it's by what's not there. So again, it doesn't unify them because it's a negative, right? It's not like there is a conspiracy from them. It's just like there's like a lack of language that keeps them in a loop.
There is actually a spiritual.
It's the death spiral. It's not that they're organized conspiratorially together to shit on the world. It's just that they're stuck in a capital spiral that shits on the world.
We need to talk about capital itself as a spiritual sort of driving force that people can become possessed by.
Capital,
and this is a unifying sort of thing.
Capital is the reduction of everything into one single unit.
The fact
out of which profit is extracted.
Capital exists.
Capital,
and it waits for any poor sucker to come along and treat it as capital, and that's when they become possessed.
As soon as you have currency.
Do you see what I'm trying to do here? Yes. Because there is an organization that's up higher.
As soon as you reduce anything to its representation, you have capital. Absolutely. It's the same. This is the problem of counting.
Not only that. That I think is a more primitive mistake. But the capital the capital
like this
must be put in service of itself to create more of itself. That is what makes it capital.
Well, yes. The fact that as soon as you reduce something to currency, everything else becomes currency. Breaking the wall.
Oh yeah.
All right, so what you were saying.
Tangent.
Now, what you were saying is very important because you're
I know.
talking about
Oh, I know.
an effect of a deeper problem. So, we
What
have
does Bender say? Shut up, baby. I know it.
So, yeah, there's a very a fundamental issue at hand that deals with word and number.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you recall, number is what is assigned to a layer underneath, and word is what's assigned to the layer above. So you have your significant, you have your fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental is the number system there.
And this is kind of a natural thing, though, too, right?
The divide.
Yeah.
This is how you differentiate between the
And
layers. Yes.
To need to negotiate this.
Yeah, this is all. To understand this discussion, you have to understand complex adaptive systems and where that discussion has led to.
Now, quickly, the tribes in the Amazon, whatever, there's one that doesn't count past like 3 or something for a long time.
So that's
Does
part
that
of what I'm talking about.
Fit in
but
here?
Yes, but not really about what I'm trying to say.
Because like I was trying to imagine not
What I'm trying to
counting, but even to say one of something like that is a tiger, that's a lion. Like a lion, you saw a lion
No,
to convey that story.
I'm trying to talk about a disconnect and reification. So when you have, when your language starts to incorporate number systems, right, which is what happens to modern language in general, the significant layer disappears. There is no reification. You can download things into the numerical system and quantify everything, but there is a difficulty.
You mean objects get flattened?
Exactly.
That's kind of what you're saying.
It's this,
And by significant
like
disappears,
currency.
the stack that created that expression is not there on the
right. So
interpretation
the
side.
humanity disappears,
And things get blunted into their most basic.
That's kind of the end result, sure.
Right.
But the point being is that currency, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
You were talking about how an object got reduced an object gets reduced to its currency representation, and then having a difficulty of bouncing back into being a real object after the fact. So loss of meaning.
Right.
So it's the same problem expressed in two different ways. Capitalism is one expression of it, and that is a destruction of the layer of significance into its fundamental components that make up the numerical system.
I think we need to appropriate capital, like the word. I think the way that I was just describing and using it, I think that's true. And I got that from, of course, Mark Fisher. But something doesn't become capital until it's actually in.
Until it's quantified.
It's in the process of creating more of itself,
which requires being quantified. So in
right.
order
but I'm
to
saying
become
that
more of
quantification
itself,
is more primitive thing that can be done.
So what I'm saying is that in order to become
without
more
capital.
of itself, you got to reduce everything to the same thing, and that's your
Exactly.
number system. That's your currency. It's the same problem with counting and reification. Once you've reduced it to all of that, the problem you're facing is that this system does not give any mechanism to reify anything the other way around, right? This is where you
upload back into the general consciousness,
and that has to do with the fact that that is where incompleteness theorem is rearing its real ugly head, because you cannot jump from theorem to theorem to theorem to theorem to theorem to theorem to express those things that were here in the first place, because they were expressed in and of themselves as parts of they are the statements that the system makes that do not arrive there from theorem. So I do not exist in system X is a statement that is made true by the fact that it is a statement in system X, and you cannot derive it out of it. You cannot go from theorem to theorem to theorem to theorem to get to that expression. And because of that truth, that statement is true. Right? So it's like a jumped a layer to say something else about the system itself, but you cannot arrive at that statement from below. And
I get the topic, but I was fuzzy on following that.
basically, mathematically speaking, once you do the reification downwards, the reification upwards does not have a computable mechanism. There is no there's no way to come
Not
back.
computable, but potentially self-coherent. If you're the
Right.
one who wrote that, then it comes right back into this.
Once you've reduced the
Forest
statement
of paths.
into the lower layer, that statement cannot jump back up to the higher layer. There's no theorem by which you can arrive back at it. So a word like love.
And well, every layer has these inconsistencies.
This is what makes a layer jump a layer, is that
Right.
you can't represent what's in there
And
by there.
in fact, we have very little. You have very little confidence, unless lower layers get verified and validated by higher and higher layers, saying, okay, this model of the lower layers seems to be working. It's worked for a long time. That's the only way that you kind of that these lower fuzzy things get less wrong over time.
Yeah,
Your understanding of the model.
So you can make statements about the lower layers, but when it comes to the higher layers of making those statements, the lower statements cannot arrive at that.
Right.
So
It's always
you're
like
always
that.
blocked.
Yeah, that's weird.
So
It's a challenge.
so the net result is that this whole layer gets obliterated in language and doesn't get referred to or reified anymore, despite the fact that everything that we experience comes from the same layer, and now we don't have a language to even talk about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And net result. So
But we do need language to be able to navigate this.
talk about tall order. Again, the very aspect of the
Yep.
emergent tribe has to actually even speak this language to begin with.
Right. So we need ways of symbolizing
Three
Like-
minutes. I'll be outside.
acknowledgement of the different databases of different APS databases.
I'm just getting food.
Yep. In other words, like a multi-agent, multi-node world. Which we are in. because I think this is
Significant.
wave your first cough for welcome back. Yeah.
So things have been said.
The way that you organize in this kind of plateau structure, whatever, the holonic model, as we've been calling it, which is where you can look at certain holons as depending on certain other holons. In other words, parts are made of parts. While at the same time, each holon should be seen as a whole unto itself. In other words, its own domain, right? And this gets back to that kind of.
It does.
Well, an object can be an aspect,
does.
can be a domain, everything can be anything.
It does. I was more trying to get to the point of. So, just before we went off to the burb, we were talking about how once you download something to the layer below, it becomes mathematically impossible to reify it in the other direction.
Not through a systemic mathematical type of proof.
Through
Right?
that
And
layer.
this is Godel,
Through that
where
layer.
there again
So
still.
so the net takeaway is that in order to sustain the upper layer without it dissolving into the bottom layer and becoming absolutely meaningless, is that you have to appropriate. You base that's the mechanism.
Interesting.
Of
like
just
appropriate a term.
of just
It's
stuffing
like-
it into the upper layer and with a complete disregard for a mathematical reification.
It's like
underneath
almost
it.
just like taking a copy of just the name and storing it in your database. Now
Exactly.
I'm gonna figure out what this term means.
Yeah, and apply it more in terms of where it fits rather than a
So,
dictation.
and again, the tall orders today. Like, think about trying to ask people to do that.
Well, the whole thing becomes like almost like you have to perfect yourself.
It becomes a flux of amorphous, like reality name space.
So we're coming to a point of where we can say there's no prescription. There's a description, but no prescription that follows. Because
prescription.
the prescription is entirely contextual, right? Due to the way the description is like layered out as more of a probability field.
Right. And again, the point is, once again, we would say something dumb like, oh, it's all about the meta prescription, not prescriptions in themselves. The meta prescription is the one that comes into context, does the context side work, and then notices the environment of objects and the economy of demand.
Yeah. Which dictates the prescription right then and there.
That's where it
Which
comes
may-
from. It's
which
not a
may not be-
specific thing. I don't say, oh, the goal is this, the prescription is this.
And this is great because this lends us into what the fuck a meta schedule is. That point in and of itself demonstrates it very, very well. You land into a context, what do I do now? You do that thing, you land into another context, what do I do now?
So we
And
could
so you don't
say-
have a schedule of goals, but you have a schedule of response.
We could say goal. If there is a goal, it's to focus on the meta schedule or something. How would you say? What would be your activity? Are we focusing on the meta schedule?
Well, it makes the goal static and not a point of anxiety, right? Because if you're moving from goal to goal to goal to goal to goal to goal, right? Each step along the way is
Which can be good. Who that is? It must be Dustman.
This is.
Here to get his car. Or did you just come in and take a shit or something? Because, like, your car's been there for, like, 20 minutes plus.
Yeah, dude.
I even called your name out.
oh, Dustin.
Nice.
How's it going?
Welcome. Good entrance.
Yep.
We are live, but that was definitely masked by all the hideous noise
Oh yeah.
being made by bags crinkling.
Oh yeah. Don't crinkle your bags.
No.
Oh, I'm gonna make some noise.
Getting some work done.
Yep.
Cheers.
Nice. Doing that island.
Yep.
Oh, it's about time. Yeah. Nice. Cool. So we'll probably put up our noise barrier, maybe. What is he doing? He'll be doing some cuts. It's not a lot of cuts,
So yeah,
but there will be noise.
tall orders.
There will be noise, and there's always noise. Isn't that part of the problem too?
It's a tall order. Not only does the tribe has to be self-sufficient on an individual scale, they all have to have.
And
a
what does that
proper-
mean? We didn't
a
even
re-
define what does self-sufficient mean. Haha. Are you talking primitive tech trees or
That is
which don't matter? Now you're
So,
pie in the sky.
when
Are you
I
talking about prepping, like storing food? Now I'm pie in the sky.
no. They're all pies in the sky. Primitive tech is meant to be more of a
What is
symbolic,
self-sustaining? Or is that the word you said?
self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient.
It's the same principle that holonic organization takes. That each part is also a whole to itself.
Not to mention, focusing on the meta schedule. That underpins. That is self-sufficiency,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's almost one and the same.
Yeah.
It's a willingness and a proper map of reality, if you will, to understand that you map reality and to have model of that and to be able to hook in to link up with others on the same types of wavelengths, if you will. Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, prepping, primitive tech, all of these kinds of ideas, they're more they serve more like spectacular demonstration.
Which needs to be bootstrapped.
which is symbolic.
Mhm.
So our discussion of it is not as necessarily as in this is what we should
Right.
be doing, but rather to
Yeah.
demonstrate a very simple example of what it looks like when it's being done in that context versus another context. So prepping is basically the difference between primitive tech and prep is the plateau in which it's engaged, in which the same activity is engaged.
So expression is to be bootstrapped. That's just another thing I wanted to throw in there.
And bootstrap is perpetual.
Right. It's not something that becomes a tidbit of fact that you add to your library of facts in your web of argumentation for how to argue certain points.
Yeah.
This is any point is to be taken apart at its word, right on the spot. Never mind going into where that discussion leads. Just pick apart the words right then and there. Right? This is the kind of thing that's what bootstrapping is, right? Even
Well,
in conversation.
You want to avoid a situation where you're drooling, right?
But I'm talking like a negotiation that needs to happen between peers to understand what coherence, right? And once you've understood coherence, then you
So-
can more freely utilize certain models.
So what you're talking about is that making sure that the unsaid parts are the parts that are actually agreed upon. So if there's a sequence of words I do express, the sequence of words I didn't say that underpin it all should already be shared. Again,
Right.
tall order.
And this is a part of part
Language
of relationship building.
and
this
language
is
and all of that.
you could pull up like ideas that I've had for a long time about like a peer update protocol and like having a database and like negotiating on terms and like building up examples and stuff. Like your understanding of language between any individual should be kind of unique, ability to be unique, right? And this is the kind of database I'd like to share, and which has to be, this is how we negotiate guilds, this is how we talk about guilds. Guilds are contours of reality, of behavior of collective people together.
What's interesting about language is that it can be installed on the fly. So, for example, if I give you a piece of information, with that piece of information, I can also say something along the lines of, and this is how you should interpret it. Right? So, not only feed the foreground, but also feed a background as foreground
Right.
to fix it.
So you're kind of linking up the abstract in the second statement there. These
Yeah.
are the protocols you can use,
Right.
or utilize to construct this statement.
So language is flexible to be able to expand itself that way.
So, but my thing, like with deck protocol or the card game, is like, how do you kind of ritualize these things to get people started? So it's like a simplistic ritualization of the process of updating a database, pieces of language with each other using cards.
I think this is where we butted heads representationally for a long time, because from my perspective, it's always been in conversation. And a conversation does not allow for, like, say it's a
I
chat.
can put it another way.
Say it's a chat, right? A conversation in the form of a chat. Yeah, you like each individual statement is a card that flows into it, right? But after the fact, that collection of cards is manipulated.
There's that's not even true. That is true, but there's more to it, because some things said don't get written down. Only it's kind of what.
Except it is. Like if you're looking at a chat
Onto an
record,
audio recording or something, yes, and it should be. Like that's right.
Let's talk about it as if it is being recorded in a chat-like format, right? I type it out, and it's in a bubble, and it just flows up like a chat.
So you want to walk through right now the modes of operation of the dashboard.
Well, I wasn't going to go through the modes themselves, but I was trying to reflect back on where we fundamentally differ in the difficulty of this representation, because in my head,
Deck protocol, card game, all that.
in my head, deck and card protocol is something that overlays these kinds of conversations. So you have the conversation which generates the actual content, and then you have a deck protocol which looks at it, organizes it as whole cards, and puts it together. But it can only do so after it's been said. So you can't. You basically have blank cards on the one end of the spectrum, where it's only the rules, the abstract, and then you have the actual content, which doesn't have rules and is just flowing. And so my difficulty in reconciling this is in trying to say, this has to follow that.
When you're making a message, you may tag it with this and that. Like a few conversations get tagged and added to, right? So that's in the moment.
So the tagging
organization.
So the tagging itself is a conversational event, but its interpretation can be taken farther, deeper into the system.
Yeah. This kind of is reminding me of that semantic trees kind of stuff.
Yes. So
that it needs to be.
So
the data needs to be married the whole way through.
Exactly. So as the conversation is flowing through, the job of a card is to sort of negotiate the schema of where each piece of the conversation fits in, and then that is your card. And it's so fucking difficult to get to that point, right? Because it's all entirely dependent on what had happened rather than what you want it to happen again. That goal versus momentary immersion.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but
and that's
that being said,
enough,
if
it's
you
a
have
source
tools,
of anxiety.
if you're given tools, especially with others to work together to identify and tag your conversations, it may actually make it a lot easier to organize around what was said.
Totally redlined that one.
Gotta cover it.
Yeah, so really, it's not that the format isn't inevitable. It in fact is. It's just that formulating protocol around it, which are based on conversation, like the conversation itself is what's given the schema. Right? Because you're feeding the protocol of how to read the protocol in the protocol. And that's like the flow of the conversation is the input of the protocol, and the other side of it, how to interpret it, is what makes it a protocol.
Feedback once again.
So yeah, like this interdependence is what makes card layout on paper fucking almost a pipe dream. If I don't mean to say it that
Okay,
my
now that
software
you've
is
said
almost
that,
a pipe
I get
dream.
it.
My software is almost a pipe dream. So
But I am willing to bend and break rules. And here's where I wanted to come at it, at the angle of guild facilitation. So think of what facilitation is in an
Conversation,
organization.
yeah.
It can even be an outside paid service
But
of
it's
a
still a
facilitator who comes in, of course. And here are my constraints. Let's say you've got a room at most, imagine just 50 people. But 50 people need to kind of hash some things out for the organization. The facilitator needs to be aware of different tactics or whatever to employ to get people to actually commit to that writing something down, even though you know it needs to be fed back and it shouldn't be taken as stone. That's the creative kind of jump that a facilitator needs to get out of people.
what's funny about that is that is the entirely
To be vulnerable, that's what they would say.
that whole entire role is encompassed by mastery, right? Facilitation
Right, yeah. No, I
and
know.
mastery are like
As far as coherence,
two words saying the same thing.
quite simply, it's replicating back down to the participant.
Yeah. So isn't that funny that if through all of that jargon, modern jargon, the only real element that's important is actually like the function of the master.
Well, this is what's special about the coherence model, and that we do model it, is
That it
because
bleeds
we
into
can
everything.
we can talk about this, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
It does make sense as a metric, but once again, it's not held down at certain data points. It's a sort of ongoing thing. It's a description of.
It's a qualitative thing, not a quantitative one. Mastery is qualitative in the sense that you either have coherence or you do not. There is no formula for it. There is only, did you use the right metaphor with the right person at the right time? Which is the entire discussion of the angles of ingress and why grand mastery involves being able to bridge different angles.
Well, and of course, coherence is even within oneself, not just in relation.
Oh yeah, like the story you tell yourself. When I speak about this, I use tangible examples, but I'm trying to talk about scale invariant things. So what pertains to a conversation between two people pertains to a conversation you have with yourself, pertains to a conversation groups of people have with groups of people. Like you
Right.
don't.
The scale invariance is that we're utilizing a model simple enough, how you would say, that it's applicable to at multiple layers at scale, so to speak.
Well, the discussion is really about the layers, and therefore scale invariance
The scale invariance is
pops up
chasing.
because it's just a discussion between two different layers.
The scale invariance
So
is
here or there or
chasing this
there.
strange loop idea.
Yeah,
It's the idea that things are modeled holonically as in plateaus.
it's
if you
wherever
will.
you have a distinction between layers.
Not that they are modeled, but if we model them like that, it allows us to be open about their interpretation. That each holon is a whole in itself, that's what it means. When your brain looks at it, stop treating it like what the object was you were told it is. And again, feedback, bring in. This is
Well, it highlights
presence,
it highlights the importance
immersion.
of it highlights the importance of being actively engaged in animism. To perceive the world around you explicitly as living onto itself, if you will. Like what you're talking about ties into a more of like a. So what I'm trying to say here is
I wanted to connect this back to immersion, like that's immersion.
well, this
right?
is immersion as well, because I'm not trying to talk about like treat everything as if it has a spirit per se, but wholes onto themselves, parts all as wholes onto themselves, the disposition, that treatment of the world around you
Right.
as
It's like
wholes onto themselves
what
in
that
parts is the correct disposition. not a
It's
spiritual
because
thing.
it's because
but-
the whole of itself, the whole that's being invoked, is actually you, the whole stack of interpretation, and including this object of interpretation.
Well, right, but, like
That comes with it.
there's an entire wholeness to the operating system perceiving everything too, which ties into why things need to be, why that's the correct disposition.
Hmm.
It just
Right,
sort
and
of
again
it's
we
like
have
a puzzle piece.
again we have the self model coming up. Like, why do you do it? Well, just do it, and as a participant, you must do it.
It's a reflection. It's a reflection of the senses
You'll get it.
themselves, right? Like if the thing that represents your senses is disconnected from what the senses are saying, right? Like if the narratives that it spins
Don't
up,
believe your lion eyes.
something like that, yeah. Like the entire murkiness of this is in bringing in line together both what's coming in and what's outflowing to be coincidental
This
with
is like
with
old, this feels like old school Portal Mound discussion right now. Like just the very perception of objects. It's all coming back to that, man.
Well, of course. The rest of the discussion has always been about how to tangibly organize around the notion, and the cool things in this discussion, even if we haven't gone anywhere tangible still,
It's coming.
are the fact that the tall order, like that point, cannot be underestimated. It is so vital to the entire thing. Like it's making me at the very least say something to the effect of, I'm not at that point. Like that tall order that we're talking about that is required, there's no way I'm
Right.
a representation of that. No fucking way. Too tall. But it is what it is, and denying that is half-assing it. And if we're to be serious about anything, is to be saying is like, there is no half-assing this one. There is the all or not, like you were saying,
Mhm.
the all or nothing.
Yeah, about
is a
the
very, very
kind of quality of a guild, of any guild.
yeah. The all or nothing thing is
You either have the DNA present or it simply isn't, and its other things are
exactly.
whipping in and out.
Exactly, and so for those reasons alone, like we're nowhere near our
But it's getting pretty damn good, like, as far as
at least
kind of
there's something
picture
to
painting.
aim at. Frustratingly, it becomes a sort of a goal, which is a source of anxiety in and of itself. In that sense,
Yeah, it's tough.
So-
It's tough, but I know that others are also working on basically the same thing and would be on board just
but
like
it's not
that.
even. But it's not even others. It doesn't matter how many others are working at it because of the all or nothing thing. Any half-assing from anywhere, including ourselves, is still a
But
mile
yet there's
short.
such a bubbling up kind of like energy, which
Yeah.
is fueling these kind of ideas.
None of this is to say that the threshold shouldn't be pushed towards. Like, that is a threshold to overcome. At least there's a tangible threshold, right? Like,
It's very potent. The model has a lot of power. If you think about it, in
Capital
terms
P.
of power, like we were talking, the model has power to
well, it seeps into every layer. So, yeah, its
to-
capacity is...
allow something better to emerge on top of what's already there. Not to destroy anything like that, but not to fight
Well,
it.
and it's funny, it's the same primordial power out of which everything is already built. So it's not like a special hocus pocus power. It's nothing to do with like. It's nothing to do with you know.
And it's weird after saying like
What would you call it? Not
your
emergence.
model's just opening your mind, sort of
Transcendence. That's the word. I fucking hate it so much.
transcend the
There's nothing
artifact.
there. The discussion is not about transcending anything, and like, because what you're saying, it's like taking the pieces that are there as they are there,
Mhm. No fight.
and continuing the layering that has preceded them anyway.
Lots of chill.
Besides all the garbage that they've are capable of producing after the fact, despite the fact.
Yeah, it's a non-issue. Just chill.
So yeah, so as far as the word transcendence or any kind of like singularity or any kind of like
But yeah,
threshold, yes, there is a threshold. That's what's being confused here. But that threshold is the same threshold as one has from emerging as a child into adulthood, becoming self-sufficient. Like it is a natural course of things.
Now, I'm just reminded of like DIY hackerspace that happened here in Barrie, and I knew and interviewed some people after it was already gone. But like, I've known of people personally who are into this kind of idea of a sharing space, commercial space, utilizing for different stuff, like kind of like community owned, like even business type hub.
A faint idea of the membrane that we talk about with the trade guild.
Like this is
Right?
really like such a long vision.
Is that
how do you protect that? How do you allow beautiful relationships between people where it's like we're working together to have more for all of us? And you have a DIY hacker space. Anybody can come and record music and all this kind of stuff.
So the system
Or cut wood.
So the system, from its
3D print.
numerical perspective, has one weakness: it can't not reify upwards. So if you appropriate an upper layer that is hidden well enough in the bottom layer to not be anything that it can target, it's that discussion
Right.
again. If you name something, you can target it.
Right. If you're using
it doesn't latch onto it.
We are talking about the plateau of the market,
Yeah.
the capitalist mode of production and its objects, and utilizing that's our base.
Right. So from
We're doing
its
something on top of that.
so from its perspective, everything is tickety boo. And that's that's what the definition of the membrane is.
And, like,
in that it doesn't
that,
care enough
that
to
place fell
penetrate
apart
it.
because they didn't have a model
Well,
to organize people together.
hence my description of it was a faint notion of an idea of whatever that membrane is, without any of the concrete understanding of that there needs to be a membrane to begin with.
Right. And then
So-
it's like
so it's like
that becomes a really weird marketing.
It's an unreified quality, like it's a quantitative unreified quality. It didn't jump that layer, right? It tried to utilize the fundamental layer to arrive at whatever protectorate it wanted for its undefined qualitative elements that had no representation whatsoever. Because you can't arrive at it from quantification. Why should that space exist? Well, the only reason is that it's making money.
At least it can pay its bills. That's all you care about.
So, where does that land on the upper layer of existence? Like it exists in,
Right.
in,
Yeah,
in
like
and of
I
itself
don't
as a
agree
whole.
with like trying to push the government to like convert to socialism or something where all companies are become nationalized or like this kind of stuff.
I don't think I suggested that
Like
because all of that will
shit's
do.
insane to me. Just it's revolution, right?
All of that shit does is shuffle shit around, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem,
Right.
which is again lack of reification for why are we doing any of this, which exists on a wholly different layer beyond the rational.
Well, yeah, when you talk about like a meta schedule, context, demand economics, right? It's
Rationality
all just keeps
is limited.
bubbling up.
The rationality of the decision is limited to that moment. It's a quality of it. And as soon as you try to extract the rationale as a quantified element of the dream,
To come back up.
it loses its entire purpose for driving the entire machinery. It becomes besides the point. Oh, cool, we can rationalize this about that, about this, 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 about that, about this, about this. But the person doing all of that rationalizing is nowhere in the picture.
Right.
So it's a hijacking. But rationality is also a quality of the moment and allows you to perceive how to immerse yourself into the next moment and be present in it.
Right. That's why I brought up that Amazon tribe. Like, I wanted to just kind of get a little bit deeper at, like, what amount of quantification is okay
I think a better
along
example
this
is a different tribe.
perceptual manifold, if you will.
What about that tribe that this guy was talking to him about Jesus? And he's like, did you know him?
Didn't redline it. See that?
So the guy tries to
who
talk to
got
him.
killed on a Sentinel Island.
No. That's a different tribe.
This is one of the number tribes who didn't count.
No, this was the conversation went along the lines of, you're telling
Did
me
he
about
get
this.
This is the one where he got unconverted
Yes.
from Christ. Oh yes,
Yes, he got unconverted because the conversation went along
from
the
the
lines
church.
Of, yeah, like
Unconverted
I mean,
from the church.
let's put.
Let's be real here.
That doesn't matter.
It does. Well, it's a distinction.
What hit him though was the fact that his entire life he had been talking about a person he's never actually interacted with.
Right. The whole idea that the senses become primary in this experience to him.
And then this tribal person is going with like,
Have you ever seen him? Why should I trust you?
Why, why is this passed
Why
down
should I believe
story
you?
why is this passed down story that nobody you know lived through?
Right.
You didn't talk to about
Yeah.
personally,
And that's kind of a scary
whatsoever.
This is a scary thing
And you're
about,
telling me this this thing out there that you never even you don't know.
dude. Now apply
That
this.
hit so
Apply
hard.
this to the culture of civilization
That
itself.
hit hard. Well, I did. That's where it hit hard.
Everything that we know is an accumulation of things done from people who aren't alive right now, and supposedly that's the way it was done, right?
Our knowledge exists in books. What the fuck?
Which is all not the thing itself, but an after-the-fact expression, representation.
It's worse than
once
that.
again.
It's worse than that. It exists in books, and when you're tasked with talking to another person, it's a chore, because you're arguing about what's in the books.
Right.
So, like, imagine talking to your mom about anything. You're not talking about personal experiences. You're talking about what's in some book. This is the way time works. This is the way physics work. This is the way math works. I'm not saying this is invalid
Damn.
subjects, but
This proves
none
that
of this is talking about you or experiences. You're talking about some shit in books.
the Earth is actually less than 50 years old.
Because we
that
are.
proves it.
Because we are. And with that...
Good call. Be right back.
regards to
The tall order.
Yeah, we were like talking about how much of a tall order the guild actually is required. So from the perspective of, say, primitive technology, even the little tribe we're kind of discussing right there, the self-sufficiency that's involved, and the ability to persevere through the circumstances that entail as a group, with everybody being still self-sufficient and just jumping on whatever the next task is, to prepping, done a similar idea, but on a more modern plateau, in which you have to have a perseverance sort of mentality with regard to the work that's required, and everybody having very similar sets of skills at any given moment to jump on a task that needs to be done.
Right. I mean, like the idea of self-sufficiency, like back to that kind of discussion.
So modern world has us very specialized, right? Which means, to an extent, we become very, very incapable at certain activities that are life-sustaining. So the lowest bar, if you will, is to be competent at life-sustaining activities and all of the cooperations involved for that.
And that's
Right.
almost like just like the meta mindset again,
Yeah.
right? Of having the goal of focus on the meta schedule,
And you'll notice
focus on your context, your
Yeah.
environment, your world around you. In other words, being present.
and
and all this.
what you'll notice is what you're focusing on is a shifting target, right? Like today it's this, tomorrow it's that. It's not a concrete
Right. You're not on
set
a
of elements.
set of rails,
Right.
just trekking forward.
Right. That's the main contingency, and the other one is of course we've talked about the meta schedule roughly, but let's just try to hone in on what that is. The meta schedule is basically your moment by moment experience, right? With the information from the previous moments being a qualitative element that defines what the context of the moment is. That's what we call the record of commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things that have already happened, and they are present in the moment. That's what presence really is. And then the counterpart, the immersion part, is to take all of that and to feed the next activity such that it fits and resonates with the rest isomorphically, and that is the immersion element. So presence is the quality of the moment, immersion is the outflow of it, and with that disposition we transform psychosis and neurosis from being latched onto the mythology itself to being part of the mythology in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. To add that special mirror to the
Mhm.
funhouse, as they say.
So, in a way, nothing changes, but everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reflective porch. They transform the psychosis that's there, the neurosis that's there, into presence and immersion. So, you never really leave the narrative, you never really leave feeding the narrative,
So,
but at the same time, it's not the narrative, it's the schedule.
and there's this kind of dynamic way of interpreting artifacts.
Right. Because
That's how we
because the
communicate.
record of commitment shapeshifts the artifact that are present. So the same artifact in the next record
It's like
shifts.
knowing that any expression has come from an alive being.
Yes. Rather than a mechanical
That's
process.
how, rather than looking at the words, oh, this instructs this and that, and you kind of tuck it away in a file to pick it up later and reread it. Oh,
Ooh,
close. Here comes the part, though.
Come on.
You're just gonna break the can. Oh, he didn't overload the mic. Nice. Good job. And cheers.
So yeah.
Don't forget to sip after a cheers.
Sorry.
And after just cracking your beer. Come on. Gotta teach you how to drink.
So yeah, the real meat and potatoes of the heart of the guild is this meta schedule. And the reason it's being...
This is what propels activity, ideally, in the guild.
So we've circled around the idea of moment, right? Many, many, many times. And now it's time to give it a little bit of concreteness. Heartbeat. So if we think of moments as heartbeats, like the take in,
Right.
push out, take in, push out, take in, push out. That is kind of like a natural cycle, and it also is a great metaphor for experience in the sense
Even
of
breathing
moment
has-
comes in.
Breathing has the same kind of quality.
Yeah.
Which would be your preferred
Breathing
analogy.
breathing is a great analogy to the same idea. Of course, it's all again metaphorical stuff. So we're talking about a cycle of in and out and in and out. So the moment is like that. Takes information in, crunches it into something, pushes that something out. That becomes part of whatever is coming into the next moment. Crunches it together, pushes it out, on and on and on, just like a fluid, cyclical heartbeat. Right? Pushes artifacts into the bloodstream. Why? Again, there's no. It's part of the model. Like the model is trying to mimic the living creature, nothing else. So that metaphor is just being utilized to keep that flow going. Experientially speaking, the mind cycles, the body cycles, the days cycle, everything, every single process cycles.
Right, and it's something kind of reflected in the very abstraction. The idea of abstracting something is that it's happening recurringly.
To the point
That's
where
why
you can
abstract
touch
it.
into a specific word and make a process.
And but life
out of
is
it.
just made up of these kind of cyclical abstraction building.
So again, this is a question of disposition and correcting your mental makeup to compensate for that experience, to integrate it into the actual expression of experience itself.
To make the map.
Right.
Maps
Which
are shared.
and
This
we've
is
been-
how we organize.
Right, and our
1, 2,
language has
3.
been moving away from that for a long, long time into a kind of a linearity.
Of meta abstracting, self-analyzing.
Well, numbers flow in a line. This, then that, then this, then that, then this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The natural number system is underpinning all language, if you will, but with its power, it has a very specific weakness. That's the incompleteness theorem. And this is where we have issues where we can't jump up the layer because you got nothing in the layer below to give you that jump. So the point of all of that is that numbers tend to represent both number and word, right? But word is it is all the number sequences that aren't theorems but are true because they are not theorems, if you will. So they're still part of the same system that cannot explain them. Anyway, the
A
point
bridge
there,
too far.
the point there being is again it's a verification problem, and in every essence of the problem, there's no way to get back up.
Right. So
The loop
yeah,
is
that-
only seen from the top.
and this kind of categorizes all problems, in a sense.
What's interesting about this phenomena, though, especially if you think about modern development into thought, is that modern thought at the same time lunges itself into the abstract completely, aka particles are defined by formulas, all of that jazz, while at the same time insisting on that part, the mind-made part of reality is the one thing that is not real. So it's a very contradictive disposition to be in.
The hard problem. Oh, it's so hard.
Well, the hard problem sets itself up to be entirely laced in abstraction and then denying that abstraction is real. So it pushes everything into representation
Right.
and then denies that the representational world out of which this abstraction came to begin with is real. So it's
Right.
a kind of a self-contradictory
And
position to
maps,
be in.
It tries to map its entire self while doing this.
Right,
which is
and
kind
getting
of the
nowhere at the same
funny part.
time because it can't find itself in itself. Because that requires the jump to the next layer. Right? The theorems don't follow. So, it's a very interesting
Yeah, like
disposition
how do you
to
prove
be
it?
in.
How do you prove it bottom up?
So the idea of delusion and illusion and all of that is very, very, very concrete in that sense. In that we live in a mental makeup in which abstraction reigns supreme, or the mental makeup of the world is that which is taken for reality, while at the same time denying any mental makeup for reality to be valid. I mean, that is the current argument. And then you
It
have...
has to be so. Such a perfect 180 contradiction.
And then you have
How
this,
else could it be?
And then you have these ridiculous situations in which one side argues the other over the details, and yet getting absolutely fucking nowhere for millennia. I mean, how many times have you in your own life heard, "Oh, we live in a modern age, how can people believe in such superstitions?" Right?
The
But
science religion, of course.
But that same phrase has been uttered for thousands of fucking years. We're getting nowhere, right?
Yeah.
But we're getting nowhere
Right.
for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that reason is that it's a contradictory position to be in,
Right.
in the first place.
And
You've
it's,
abstracted the world
It's
around
always
you.
like when you get into politics and stuff, like left wing, right wing, something to sing. It's a quote from a band I know. It's like it turns out that fanaticism on either end is completely wrong. Like this kind of wholesale taking in of a narrative at
Well, how can a disposition that excludes the vast majority of people that exist on this planet be correct?
but both sides have similar things to say about each other, no doubt.
Well, yeah, this is the exact.
And it's like you just get sucked in.
Well, this is opposite. When both sides say the exact same thing about each other's side,
That's the craziest
you don't
part.
get an opposite. You get an opposite.
Having personally feel like I've hovered and floated here and there, like to witness that, where an exact same point is made from the other side on the other, like they think they're each is doing the other's thing, and you can actually like kind of like melt into their worldview and like understand. Okay, I see why they're saying that. You melt into this one, and okay, I see why they say that. But the statements against each other are the same. Like I've experienced that. I'm not saying all of them, but
No, this
I've-
is not
I've
this is
seen
not
where-
uncommon.
where it's like the same exact. This is like the Nazi or the Hitler. Or who's you're the Hitler? No, you're the Hitler, right? And it's like
So, I think it's best to qualify again what you're talking about, and I think I'm in the same boat to be able to do that. So, once upon a time, I think I said something along the lines of the right is united in whatever they're latched onto, the wrong thing that they're latched onto, whereas the left is united in their division. The thing that identifies the left is how much it is against itself. It is vehemently against the right, but it perceives aspects of itself to be on the right. Whereas the right is like a fucking
pardon.
is like a fucking steamroller that doesn't comprehend the nuance of what the fuck it's rolling over in any capacity whatsoever.
Yeah,
Which makes this part wrong, but this part not any useful either.
yeah, and that would kind of, I guess, align with my kind of maybe like a simplistic overview of. But
It's definitely simplistic.
The left wants to feed back the individual into the collective. It wants to be heard.
But it can't
individual wants to be
decide what
heard.
the collective is.
On the right, it's kind of that's not necessarily a thing. It's
On the
more,
right, it's
more
shoehorning what the
important.
collective is.
It's more important what's worked in the past.
Well,
What is
on
already,
the
what
right,
is now.
the
The-
right, the
in
right.
other words, a crystallization, a calcification,
Here's how
traditionalism.
I'll classify
That's the way
the
I
right.
kind of seen it.
I'll
maybe.
classify the right as trying to shoehorn whatever is happening into its master plan. So it doesn't matter what the feedback is. We're
That sounds
plowing
like weird,
through.
like political tactics. But
We're
what about
plowing
like
through.
ideology of the people?
There is no
Conservatism.
there is no
There is
there is
reason
no
for
ideology
conservatism.
of the people.
There's also a reason for freedom.
There's no ideology of the people. It's trying to put an average on something that isn't average. That's the mistake. You can't group people. These people need that. Those people need this. Those people need something totally else. Right? So
Sure.
there is no the people as an overarching architecture
There's at
to
least
deal
this
with.
illusion, at least
That's authoritative.
maybe a necessary
Authoritarianism.
illusion of the market.
Well, the market
and
is authoritative.
Like the layers of the plateaus that have been built up so that we can have this type of civilization that we're at.
Well, those are authoritative too.
They become just background assumed.
Their background, they're assumed, but they are authoritative in their own way. In the sense that you can't, for example, fuck off into wilderness because that land is owned by somebody. If it's not now, it will be. Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so authoritarianism and market are like one and the same.
Interesting and agreed. Objects viewed and utilized as capital by capitalists.
Again, it's a
creates this
plateau.
whirlwind vortex of motion.
You can
yeah.
so capital
Yeah.
in this sense becomes a mechanism of shelter. That is its job. So if we are
that's
not
very fundamental. Yes.
if we're not eschewing capitalism, if we're not on the boat of saying fuck capitalism,
then we're
Right.
saying basically any geography, any land, any property we own is supporting itself. Bottom line, it's got that done, and then we start talking about real relationships. Right? Does that sound cold? That sounds weird and cold, kind
It
of.
sounds weird in the sense that
But something doesn't exist
when
in this environment.
when you're not looking as capitalism as the lifeblood of the individual's participation in society, which it is right now, right? Like you
Right.
sell your labor kind of deal.
Right.
When you're not looking at it that way, what's strange about what we're saying is that capital is entirely redirected to contain an area in which gift economy thrives.
Right.
That is entirely alien.
Period.
So that sheltering, that redirection of capital
Yeah.
to create a
So-
bubble of lack of capital is what's so fucking
I'm
strange
feeling
about it.
like charlatans have been down this road and failed many times, and it's so easy and convenient to say, well, as the charlatan, hey, I need to pay the bills to keep this place here, but meanwhile it's not guild production.
I like that we have our tall order element to our discussion because it is strictly
At this point-
prevents us from being said charlatan.
Can you
for that
imagine
pur-
how
for-
many
for that
people out
purpose.
there have meetings like this? How many people are out there who are talking meetings?
And how many of them are about let's do a revolution?
Right, dime a dozen.
But
Yeah, don't mistake that.
revolve around what? What are we revolving around?
Right.
Same fucking shit. If we're revolving around the same fucking shit, we're just gonna go into the same fucking shit pile.
Don't expect different, right?
So ultimately, like look at historical revolutions.
And
People die,
This is why I like to
and
look
then
at
nothing changes.
human
And
organization.
People die, and nothing changes.
Human organization as a significant and important point. How do humans organize? This is
Emergently.
what I'm saying is the difference between one way to go and another way. It's like the path.
So the difference is between coercion, civilization, coercion.
Right? In which most people
Or-
aren't even participating. Most of us are not capitalist people.
Free.
Most of us
Emergence.
are subject to capital, and we're not the ones thinking, "Oh, I've got this capital, I need to expand."
Coercion will have you believe emergence is violent and inhuman, savage, all of those different things. Meanwhile, it is the exact
Right.
same meat grinder that brought you World War II.
It's what it does, right?
Like if you want to compare savagery, you know, an organized meat grinder is not less savage than, you know, meeting your ends meet at, you know, the field of battle of whatever the fuck you're fighting for. Point being is that no, I do not subscribe to the noble savage myth per se. Right? Like there's no point in past human existence that doesn't see suffering. So there's the noble savage idea is not the perspective, which is another. I mentioned this because it's a great way to misinterpret what we're talking about.
The noble savage.
The noble savage is a myth that is perpetuated by objectivism to contrast itself, to contrast what it calls progress with what it calls savagery, essentially. And basically it's trying to paint the picture of like, oh, look at all the modern medicine that we get, look at all of the gadgets that we get that can help us through life.
Mhm.
All in the meantime neglecting that if it wasn't for the mixing of let's put it this way. when you take genetic material from two different regions that has never interacted before, you have a situation in which disease and whatnot can run rampant. It's the same situation
sure.
as you get as polluting the environment.
Totally different environments, yeah.
So this perspective that paints technological progress as the pinnacle of human achievement neglects the fact that this very same progress is causing a lot of issues into which it has to respond really, really quickly to quote-unquote progress out of the problem that it causes. So a lot of the disease
Well, that's kind of that's not fair. It's kind of
conversation.
It is definitely has been weaponized, but it's not. Doesn't matter really fair to say, oh, this people is more diseased, or that's because they're getting sick
That's
or
not my
wiped out.
point. My point is that most of our progress is in response to the fuck ups of our progress. So we do something that we
Right.
call progress.
Yeah.
It causes fuck ups. Those fuck ups are then tackled on, resolved, quote unquote.
So
And then that is considered progress.
The myth-
But the more fuck ups come out of that, and you tack on more solutions
So
on top of this.
the myth of the noble savage. What I'm gathering, I guess, is that there was a people who had problems, and civilization has been fixing that ever since. Or
And
what?
so it paints the savage as in a disadvantaged
as a
position.
previous state, like a primitive state that progresses.
Two problems with this narrative, though. The first one, the most obvious one, is that the civilized non-savage evolves from said savage. So, how do you paint that as a lesser being if that is the being that gives you civilization? First of all, first question I have for that line of thought, right? Like,
Which
how
being gives civilization?
the very savage being, out of against which civilization is contrasted.
How does civilization emerge from that?
Well, for one, civilization did emerge from that. So we're talking about an incredibly intelligent savage, if you will. How the hell are we above that? For one, this is the creature that gave civilization, and here we're on the other end going,
Well,
you're so
saying-
primitive.
That's saying that civilization emerged from savages even before narratives.
I'm not saying this. Objectivists are saying this, and objectivists at the same time paint the picture
Yeah, I'm
that
just trying
this
to get
is better
like,
than that.
What landscape are you on right now?
And in the landscape I'm talking about, you have civilization is the pinnacle of human achievement. The savages that
But like
predate us
civilization's
are below.
own understanding of where did civilization come from was from savages, quote unquote.
No,
Is
because
that,
if you look at the
like I thought that's what connection you're trying to
if
make.
if you look at mythology, civilization paints itself as something that's emergent from the gods, so above animals to begin with. So mythology in
Sure.
civilization terms already paints it
That
above nature.
It helps.
And so civilization is above nature. Civilization hates
Pardon.
nature. It condemns nature. It condemns the savage.
Right.
Meanwhile,
Yeah, I don't get
everything
it. So,
everything in reality is saying
so
to us
how
that
does-
civilization emerged from said savage.
what is
So
telling
how is
us?
he condemned?
You're saying it's obvious that that civilization came from savages. Is that's what you're saying?
From the people, civilization.
like I'm trying to put
no.
the story together. What what are
So,
you telling
so
here?
the word savage is used by civilization to refer to the lower form of humanity. So it's a degradation. It's a degrading term. So civilization calls it savages. While archaeology-wise, if you look at it archaeologically-wise, said civilization emerges from quote-unquote the same savages that they call inferior.
Yeah. So
And the question I have is, how can they be that inferior if they made you?
So you're saying that archaeologically looking at bone
There are
structures
no
in this
savages.
let's say giant organizations of people together. They were physiologically, according to the bone structure, no different than today, basically, and the savages and whoever. It's all pretty much the same.
And then you have a group, a select group of it that's advanced enough, turning around and creating an entire mythology of the inferiority of the previous state, out of which they themselves emerged, which they don't recognize.
But this must happen when you have your priest class emerging.
Exactly. When you turn mythology away,
Away from the
Generations.
being itself.
yeah, generations away, right? You no longer have people living there.
Right.
It's only fields. That's the myth that they're developing at this point. We're so superior because they don't do that.
Hot damn. And with that, we'll be right back. Yeah.
You manage yourself. I don't manage you. So,
Yep.
all of that to say, you know, is that
Which one? What topic are we on again?
noble savages.
Hmm.
So yeah, there is a
The idea of a separatedness, an upper classness, a priest classness. We are the ones who map ourselves. You do not map yourself. That's the distinction, basically.
well. I really went on that rant because it's very easy to misconstrue what we're saying into this idea of we are aiming for the noble savage, especially if you think about the primitive technology stuff we're talking about, right? Like, we're trying to portray that pre-civilization was somehow better. And that's not the case, really.
Like pre-progress.
Pre whatever's called progress, sure.
Sounds
Because
shitty.
for one, the concept of a non-violent world pre-civilization is just not true. The difference, though, is,
Okay, it's the romanticization now you're talking about of the noble savage, as said.
yeah,
Like having a
it's not a
positive
utopia.
inner view of the past and all that, and indigenous peoples, while still colonizing the shit out of the
Yeah.
land, and with your
without without even thinking about how
ego attitude.
how they resolve conflicts, if they resolve conflicts and whatnot. Obviously, conflict existed for as long as life existed. The thing is that the painting of competition is the primary template for describing this conflict is fundamentally flawed, because nature tends to balance itself out. It's more of a dance than anything else, right? It's like a cooperative dance. It's just that certain elements within the dance cease to exist, while others come into existence, birth and death.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The real only picture to paint of the past pre-civilization is generally egalitarian, because the amount of energy it takes to feed conflict is simply not available.
Right.
You're trying to feed yourself. With some very, very specific, very, very concentrated elements of violence. So, as a human species on a general spectrum, we're peaceful and egalitarian and don't engage in fighting. But in pockets of our existence and history,
specific rules, if you will.
it's broken. That generality is not applied. So you have pockets of violence amidst a generally peaceful existence, right? Which is reflective of the world today, except where conflicts are etched into paper to be over here.
Well, you try to build a harmony, but there's no guarantees.
Most people spend their time eating, shitting, and sleeping. They don't spend that time trying to kill each other.
Right, like national conflict couldn't happen in a context of guilds, just people, like guild demand and all that.
You could have conflict, but not...
Structure is only bubbling up due to demand from the bottom. There's no demand for conflict, basically. But
conflict without identity.
when there is, like, it should be, everything
flares
should be
up.
addressed.
It flares up, and it dies down for whatever it was. And nobody identifies with it. It's legend, at most. And perhaps it's recycled.
You're saying
and
that,
perhaps
ideally.
it's learned from.
Ideally, sure, yeah.
Well, no, it's not an ideal. It's you have you have everything occurring all the time up until a certain point where recorded history comes into play and erases everything that didn't get written down.
History.
How many times you and I have disagreed, didn't quite feel okay, but then recuperated, and then that same dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you can have a battle, you can have, but to identify your whole fluid existence through just these tiny little bits of historical events amongst a sea of all
Right.
the other events that have happened.
Yeah, you're talking about the disconnection from the moment, in the moment, that people have when they obsess over the past, essentially
Specific
through
events of
these
the past,
structures, That's what makes up your moment is simply the past, but not, you don't have, and this is where the model comes in, where the model of the self, you don't understand that the self and your self being and this thing that's presenting this reality is part of the equation as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
And making that shit up along
factored in,
and it's making shit up.
and it kind of like, yeah, it reminds me of like sentient machine and all that kind of stuff, like, and synthetic neurological computation, the domains of language domains, right?
Well, if
where
those-
certain things are spoken this way and that way,
If you don't
to
feed
be able to bridge that, like, you need this looseness. That's what the holonic model gives, is that.
And funnily enough, if you don't feed the synthetic machine, the synthetic neurological computation, the domain language parts, it becomes it does the whole, excuse me, runaway. Breakaway
Mm-hmm.
processing,
Right.
because it isn't adapting to anything
So like this,
below itself.
all this shit about like aspects and objects and subjects, that's all kind of part of this special domain language of
Yeah.
which this synthetic neurological computation would be interested in.
Or
It's
ideally should be.
it's as we called the special mirror in the funhouse before.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This
I
is
don't know
a-
if we use that phrase,
we have,
but
yes, it's actually Portal Mountain mythological material.
I like it.
There's a special mirror in the funhouse, and this is the one that comes back to reflect. And often it spawns its own house of mirrors,
if you will,
sort
it
of.
reflects the conceit operation so that it becomes part of the altruistic narrative that is self-aware rather than the
Right.
unself-aware narrative
Mhm.
that's about anything else.
Yeah.
Right? Like it shines a mirror on self-conceit, on conceited self.
And
Like,
it's
at
interesting,
its core,
kind of
if you
like
will.
a key to not doing that reliably is to have a map of what it is. Fancy that. And then the other thing comes into view. What does it mean
that-
to
and that
not
could
do
seem-
this?
And
That's fucked.
and another interesting point is that can really sound like dogma, because it's a representation. You can only be told this as an artifact.
Right.
That whole idea
And-
of you have to feed the artifact back into the system to even get the non-artificial elements sorted out.
So
It
like,
has to, like,
I'm reminded of like bootstrapping,
Buddhism and
bootstrapping participation.
bottle
We would
speaking.
call this. This is like the very fundamentals of how to take expression in through a bootstrapping process. Like, it's never about remembering what this means or what that means. It's
I
about
redlined it.
oh damn, you suck. It's about creating space for ideas, concepts, which we socially map. and
Which is
use.
funny enough, because every time we try to like get into what this is, we try to paint it
We
as
always
like
sound more crazy.
we're not just another set of hippies, and yet every time we say any of that, it just sounds like a couple of hippies trying to say that. It never fails. And that's the irony of it, right? Like, expression is in that way very ironic. It's us always
Mhm.
beside the point,
Yeah,
and
that's what they all say.
and that's where that's where literalism really shines its real
Right, and to be
ugly
able to
head.
map and identify, oh, you're
You try to take a
you're-
metaphor literally. What are
Right.
you gonna get out of it?
to be able to have commentary on expression of others in the moment is valuable,
And I think what metaphor,
and on yourself, obviously, self-talk.
metaphor, poetry, and hence art. Why I've kind of went on a bit of a tinge on appropriating those is because
Months ago.
it's because that upper layer, which can't be reified through theorem, right? Like, you can't jump back up, if you will. The only jumps you can make is through the isomorphism, and metaphor provides that. Metaphor is like that sort of structure of which you get a mapping without the rationality.
Right.
It's entirely qualitative, if you will. It's based on whatever happened in the layer, which hasn't been defined in code underneath it as
Right.
reason, if amongst other things.
And so these are the experiences that one has gathered through their life to have certain situations to be able to understand a metaphor and what it means to describe layers below. But we live at our own narrative level, kind of in the APS.
The reason I bring this up is because metaphor is the only mechanism we actually get to transfer any qualitative expressions whatsoever, representations. So they don't lie inside of reason, right? Like you can't use mathematical compositions to transfer the pleasure one experiences from, metaphorically, the taste of water. Like I love that phrasing for some reason. Like, right? So here, you thought of the taste of watermelon, but you thought of other things too. Sweetness. You've thought of juiciness. Like all of these like little things that one tiny expression can explode into, right? There is nothing reflective of that in the theorem bound way of expressing.
Like, why does it taste good?
Exactly.
Well, it's because it's grown.
No, it tastes good.
It's been
Final
growing.
answer.
It's been growing for more than 60 days. And
Again,
less than
shut
80
the fuck
days.
up. It just tastes good. It landed on my tongue and it
was
just like, did that
harvested.
thing, which you can't explain except if you felt that thing. Maybe I could explain it to you, or if you felt a similar thing, right? Like, and I could be like, oh, remember that thing you experienced? It's like this, except maybe attach this other quality to it, right? And then
So it is.
there's no rationality.
It's the
here.
great divide, of course.
There's zero rationality here. There's
So-
just experience.
But what I think I gathered is you're trying to describe how to describe
Sorry.
the structures, like how to express structures. You're saying it's from an arbitrary level at a higher level, and that's the way it is. You don't come from below,
Yeah. Yes.
and that's taken
but-
on faith, sort of, and bootstrapped to get experience going forward from the bottom.
But there is a secondary aspect which is rational, in that you can transform it into a metaphor, and transplant a representation which has no rationality between theory. Like if you number crunch it on the layer below in which you used to transport the information on, it won't make any fucking sense.
Well,
Sweetness.
it's
love.
because what you're doing is you're allowing a parallel.
You're just
of
using
a
a
type,
You're just
of
using
a
a number to
concept of-
transfer something.
A concept of a type, it's mapping isomorphically to something. That's what the metaphor is. So you're allowing type transference from one narrative to another.
Right. But the representation of the transference has nothing to do with it. It is logically unrelated. It's like saying 1 equals red, 2
But
equals green.
it is all representation, isn't it? All just speaking in
It is
representation.
it is
It's saying,
representation.
literally, this is this,
So-
and this is this, and this is this.
So
okay, now understand.
for me to tell you about the quality of life, I still have to talk through sounds, words, and eventually numerical frequencies of sound. aka words dissipate into numbers at some level. But those numbers, in their representation on the upper layer, have no rational correlation.
Right.
So
again,
so
we're
one equal
talking
in
about
red.
the
One equal in red is
Gödel's-
just by definition. That's
Gödel's
just that.
incompleteness theorem,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that our layers in this holonic model cannot be rationalized based on what's below. At each new layer up top, you're basically starting again with a fresh new language, which tries to tap its way like a blind man with a cane towards yet another emergence, isomorphic emergence of the layer above. And that's when things kind of get solidified somehow, and that's when we gain faith and trust in models.
So the individual meaning we get out of words is sitting at another layer of myth, right? This is what I'm just trying to condense what you're saying.
Yeah. It's like a library of stories.
I
but it's not.
The way I understand English is the way you tapping into the mythology of English, and I'm tapping into mythology of English, and together we derive something from whatever sentence you said into a real story, into a real narrative.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I meant by that. Sorry, I kind of cut you off there. I didn't mean to.
No, it's good. I cut you off. No.
Still, look, I'm famous for it, so I don't try to cut off. I'm excited.
Me too.
Is really what's happening.
And at the same time, it's okay to just take a breath.
No, but I totally respect your own interjections, and I don't mean to over talk them. So if I do,
well, thanks for that.
If I do
myself as well. Sometimes I barge in. I know I do.
I appreciate it as more than you think. It keeps me.
But I don't want either of us to forget what our point was.
The point.
That's kind of thing. So
the point.
Got give and take.
I think the point we've been hammering on is that to get more in line with immersion and presence and away from psychosis and neurosis.
Yep. The classic.
We have to understand.
Have isomorphic artifacts? Of course.
We have to.
That's one of them.
We have to understand the template of the meta schedule, like an abstract thing of what's going on, to take on faith, if you will. And the secondary thing is that understanding that once you reify something from the significant into the fundamental,
you've lost it.
It's lost unless you have metaphor to reify it back, so to speak. What that means is that you retain a qualitative language above your quantitative transformation and instill metaphor rules.
That's interesting.
Okay, whenever you see
we never
this pattern
talked about
there,
that.
it's that.
Now, is this as simple as maybe providing a protocol for coming back up? Is that what that kind of means, or like? Because I'm imagining tools for getting back into the creator mode of who created this, right? That's what you mean.
Actually, you know what?
How do you provide the metaphor?
Okay, I'll use a less direct explanation, which may start to sound more convoluted than it has to be, but that's actually
Fine.
the point. It's the difference between being literal and poetic. So,
but can you have both? Is that what you're implying? Like you can do one but then do the other? Make sure you do the metaphor as well? Like do the literal but also have a metaphor for interpretation?
That's the art.
Remember this kind of
that's
like
that's
we were
actually
talking about?
that's what would be called the art.
1-2 punch?
So that's the art, to bring the two together.
Right. But then there should be two in expression. That's kind of what we're saying. We're saying there's like a bipartite artifact creational art.
So artistic mastery could be, in model speak, defined by the isomorphisms between those two layers, where one cannot reify for the fuck of it.
Between fundamental
but
and
finding
significant.
it anyway, but
within the artifact. So within the artifact is buried both, two sides.
It's a lot like smelting.
So that's weird. And this is, again, we just hit the semantic tree bullshit again. Any data must have both sides built into it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've hit it again. This is the secret to
you
guild
know how
dynamics.
in the katana smelting process I was just talking about how like only these sides of the final product could potentially be useful. right? So you have this whole process, huge process that creates a
Yeah.
whole bunch
You'll
of
take-
different steel,
The other steel can be used for other things.
like
It's fine.
knives, forks,
But
whatever.
along the very edges, you're
There's
finding
that
this
fine,
shiny silvery
specific
metal,
specific stuff,
and you're
like
just pounding that off, taking it off to a
to another
smelter,
to another
or,
specific master.
blade.
Yeah. So there's like an alchemy to it,
Right.
right? So
To make the sword that won't break
right.
in battle. Last thing you want is your fucking samurai sword just cracked.
But the months involved to like even finding the right material to fold it the correct way, and all in the entire time you can fuck it up. The whole time you're building that shit, you can actually fuck that shit up
Of course.
because if you put too much carbon into
Watch out.
it's gonna be brittle.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, most of this is to just point out that there's an art. The art is the unifying thing that reifies back. Right. If we were to point out what art is, in model speak, with a qualitative understanding, it's the ability to use metaphor and whatnot to take expressions from the lower layer and reify them back in a way that fit right back into the ongoing myth, such that it doesn't break.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't have that support from below,
Right.
it's a very much active process.
So it helps people on a higher layer to kind of go into autopilot in a sense that it becomes much easier to deal with the layers below based on the myth structure they're being given.
Autopilot,
In their
not
terms.
autopilot.
Yeah, I
not,
knew it was the
not
wrong word.
mindlessness. No, it's okay. It's not the mindless autopilot where you just like you forget where if you're walking a specific familiar block circuit, you just arrive at your destination forgetting where you were. That's one kind. There's another kind where it's like flow, where
Right.
you're present in every step of the moment. So that is the kind of mindlessness, if you want to put it that way, that is aimed for.
That's what I meant. And where a good map is provided, that such can be reasonably expected by even a participant following a good map, mythic map, right?
I would even say it's more than just a good map. I would say it's that the whole spectrum from faith to conviction, through trust and rapport and all of that. The map you have,
Relationship between peers.
Yeah, your map is not even at faith point. Your map is at conviction point.
Right.
So you're not looking through it as like an
And
experiment.
I'm reminded
You're
of
just reiterating a ritual.
the biblical passage about throwing pearls to swine.
There's that.
It's kind of harsh, but
And with that, let's talk about swine.
speaking of,
So now we come to a point
right?
where we...
Which one?
Oh, where we can bind to our previous discussions about being more concrete guild developers in the ontological matrix, and that bubble,
Mm-hmm.
metaphysical bubble,
And
sort of bubbling up.
What are we offering as far as basically fundamental guilds to the
So
environment?
the last thing I said was that the upper layer survives, if you will, by being a metaphor, by reifying, as a matter of fact, itself from the lower layer. So if this number represents this word,
How do you
it
be
just,
a metaphor? What is it? What are you talking about? You're talking
me
about
being Zhenya
so
is
it-
a metaphor.
But I'm thinking about like how do we share in guilds and guild structure and protocols?
Well, I'm trying
and
to
this,
get to
right.
that. I'm trying to get to that. I'm just trying to paint a picture.
But something so to like a protocol has to be well expressed as an art.
Look,
Having these
well, yeah,
two sides to
our
it. Right?
thoughts are art. Our names are art. Our day-to-day lives would be the art, right? That's like the layer that it exists. It exists without rationale in the lower layer. There's no numerical computation that says I have to, feel one certain way. I have to think one
Right.
certain way. You have to respond a certain way. It's all just exists in that layer. But we have reifications by expressing it in language, by saying it, by movement, and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Sorry, I abandoned you. I'm looking for a certain chart.
the notion is that the mental existence that we have is metaphorical in essence. All the names we give things, all the things that we count, every little tiny the discernment we make is metaphorical in essence.
So remember.
So that upper layer is upheld by it being a metaphor.
Remember the cognitive alignment window, and how it shifts up into like kind of the narrative, like past the horizon. That's kind of the way. That's where we like to live, in that type of land, that plateau, if you will, right? And thinking of it as a plateau, these are built. It's built of concrete, solid feeling objects or types that come from the heavens, right? And that's the land we're just enraptured into that. And but we're saying with the cognitive alignment window, we actually have the ability to see how that enrapturement is constructed.
Yeah.
Right? To step out of the dream into the moment and watch the moment happen.
Onto itself, and that being the moment.
Right. Uh-huh.
And hence it's being a perpetual bootstrap, because if you stay in that framework, it's only the moment about the moment about the moment about the moment
So,
about
like,
the moment.
This is the only viable, I think, anchor to mythical structure for the whole rest of the APS, for everything. It should all anchor off of this type of, this is the
Right.
reality that we're in.
Right. And this flows into why, for example, mythology needs to be cyclical rather than linear. We're experientially cyclical. And so even our linear conceptualization need to flow in circles.
And as we said before, that means abstractively. As
Yeah,
well.
yeah. Like,
That's
I
a
mean,
word.
obviously I'm not going to, reincarnate as exactly Zhenya Slapkovsky, at some later point in time on the concrete earth, whatever the fuck any of that means.
No, just kind of like the point to me is that
But the dream of it is
things
much
kind
like
of
that.
echo and repeat over and over again. We just keep seeing it, and these are the forest paths
Here's a
tread through our mind.
Here's a scary thought. There are infinite Janislavskis treading in infinite timelines, being everywhere.
No.
You are all of me.
No, only here right now. Just this one.
See what I mean? Like that it feels like possession almost. But
Yep.
okay, let's pick up possession just a wee bit.
Yeah, it's
What
more,
is it?
more natural.
What is it like when somebody's in your fucking mind and actually can like connect with you like wordlessly?
It means the dude walks up with $100 bills and tells you to do something.
Am I talking about an invisible field under which all of our communications telepathically take place? Or
That's wild.
am I talking about the fact that our stacks are built up so similarly to begin with that the number of protocols we can negotiate differently is so limited, right? To have those layers actually be able to do anything.
Damn.
They're constrained to fuck, is what I'm talking about. Like, there's so many different constraints that, yeah, I can read your mind because it's under the same fucking rule set. So I'm not talking about like, oh, I know exactly where your visual cortex will orient your eye to, but I can tell.
You're talking about plateaus of civilization, basically.
Language is bound to mythology.
We all know what we share.
If
Yeah,
I
you
put
have this
into
job
the
and-
myth, if I put this into the ether, the mythology will take care of the rest of the story. If I'm good at it, cold reading, as they call it.
Oh, sure, yeah. The charlatanism
Oh yeah,
stuff.
but this is all it is. It's just that manipulation. It's a magical
Yeah,
manipulation
and
of those layers.
to my point, I was just saying, like, yeah, it's so obvious. Like, it's the plateaus of civilization that have come before us to create this masterpiece monstrosity.
The stage is set, so of course, if I just manipulate a couple of actors in it, it's gonna have that predictive power.
Yep, that's fine.
I'm not talking about like magic shit. Except it is magic shit, but it's not
But,
the
like,
magic that
so-
people think.
As far as our discussion has gone, the charlatan threat is of creating, let's say, utilization of land in a guild structure with some kind of primitive, let's say, theme. And does that get manipulated and abused?
I have a better abstract way of saying it. It's the potency of their power. Quotes power.
Whose power?
The charlatans. So, on a level playing field, the human being has certain potential for power, right? With neglect, most of the potential is just channeled to
The charlatan is obviously grasping up to some higher levels or layers to group people together in a way that the charlatan can't understand.
It's usually the channels that people are taught to ignore
At the moment.
every moment. That doesn't get you the next dollar.
I was giving the charlatan
Don't you
some
think
credit
about yourself?
that people change and people can become better and do better.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about charlatans as a concept of charlatanism only, like as a character, not as a developing.
Actually, to empathize with a
Yeah,
particular charlatan.
I'm talking about it like an egoic agency rather than a human behind that transparence. Is that the right word? It does take the individual to do the act. I do not blame the individual. I blame the systemic context through which the activity manifested.
And this is again that animistic apprehension of objects around us, in that people change.
Yeah, so when I say charlatan, I'm not talking about a person who's not redeemable. but
Right,
a
right,
character
right. As
in
much
a,
as we rag
but a
on that,
character in a myth.
it's for a good cause.
It's a character in a myth. That's the best way to explain everything we're talking about, really. When we're talking about this, we're talking about characters in myths. So
Yeah, it's good.
it also alleviates us from trying to prove a lot of shit because, quite frankly, that's not the point. Again,
Right,
as it
and
were.
this is the linguistic technology we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Is even the ability to just assert myth and say, okay, the point isn't that this has been come to rationally, that I'm going to have a theorem to which exonerates this statement at this layer. The point is the statement itself, which is to set up a metaphor for connection.
If there was any value to taking myth literally, it's for the sake of orientation. So a myth like animism, the point isn't to understand everything as imbued with an extrinsic life force.
Right.
That's
a good point.
From the perspective, from like the superstitious perspective.
I think that's like a pretty adult point. Like, yes, try it out, but the point isn't to get stuck in that trying out of the
But it is valuable.
Suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, it's valuable to take experiences in from that perspective.
Right, and once again, this is just the classic feedback things in. Don't take literally. Feedback them in, test them out. That's the point of expression, especially from a declared master, let's say.
How many people that potentially have been listening to this have gotten so angry at one point or another that they've taken an object and just smashed it to bits, like that printer in Office Space.
You mean about the world, as it were?
Just like broke and just smashed the living shit out of an idea, an object, a situation.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Like that that's the quality, right? It's not talking about a quantitative essence to the object in question. It is the qualitative experience of the activity being done.
We are evoking the zeitgeist.
Okay.
The quality.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is bringing to mind a structure of the neglect of the soul, the zeitgeist. That's what I think that you were getting into. That's what it seemed like you're painting that picture.
That's where it would come from. Yes, the frustration of that. So two aspects to what I was saying is that the first one is that given the reality to the existence of the object that you're smashing as a source of your frustration and just laying it on that, right? There's that part of it where you transfer experience onto something that's quantifiable ritualistically speaking, and proceed to metaphorically destroy that thing that is imbued with whatever frustration that you're putting onto it. It's like the scapegoat.
Scapegoat. That's what I was thinking of. I know you're talking some kind of archetypal, like, cause and reaction.
Well, I mean, if you try to, like, reason with the person in the middle of that act, what are you going to get out of them? What are they going to say? They're going to talk about whatever it is they've layered into the physical thing that they're destroying, but they're not going to talk about that thing. They don't care about it. We've all been that angry, even if we haven't done the act. So,
Yep. I punched a fridge once, and to this day I have effects.
drywall is much more forgiving.
Yeah.
Much more forgiving. It'll give you the
Speak
red.
from experience.
It'll give you the
Unless you
damage
unless you
on the
hit a
front,
stud.
but at the same time,
You
it's
got like a 1 in 8 chance that you're gonna hit the stud.
yeah. Learn your house. I did that in my in-laws' house once. Before marriage.
But yeah, like, talk about like psychology and what people go through in their moment-to-moment basis. And anger is like right out there. But if you can apply a model to it in the moment, breathe. There is a hope.
Applying to that model in the moment, in the moment of anger, is a fun challenge.
I've actually done it recently.
I've done it before, but it's a hit and miss. Overall, the interesting thing about all of that is that it is a way to pull oneself out of neurosis and psychosis and into presence and
Yep. Immersion.
immersion. With the difference being very, very, how shall we call it? Quantitatively negligible, qualitatively infinitely different. Like you can't reify it
Different.
on the fundamental. You can't calculate.
Wait, what was it that you're doing though? I don't get it. I forgot.
The difference between psychosis and neurosis versus immersion and presence.
Right.
Immersion and presence quantitatively will not look different from
This is the special
psychosis
mirror
or
discussion,
neurosis.
the special mirror in the funhouse. It's the mirror that sees itself. This is the mirror that is a model of the modeling modeler that models mirrors, of which all the mirrors are created.
It's also a window for the system to reject everything you say. Because the system can take immersion and presence and spit it back out as a formulation of psychosis, as a formulation of neurosis.
To be hijacked. Right.
Oh, you're such a good Buddhist. Why don't you get mad when I insult everything insult everything about you? Are you a doormat? See what I mean? Like everything can be twisted. well, there is that but the thing is though is that it doesn't matter how you respond.
I'm a good Buddhist.
But if you don't respond this way, you respond another way. You're still just playing, right? Like you're virtue signaling. Like there is no
Just running a calculation. Of course.
so.
This is the land of participation.
So
it's normal
immersion
and good. It's actually good.
So immersion and presence actually remains below the surface for the system to recognize. It can't tell psychosis and neurosis apart from immersion and presence.
You say below the surface, but also it seems like
As in it can't label it.
As
it
if
can't label it
it's
to attack it.
as if a lower layer couldn't label a higher layer to attack it. The lower layer never sees the higher layer, right?
Same thing.
That's where I think we're at.
And that's very important. It's not important from the perspective of like hiding away from the system, because the system doesn't provide anything legitimate to hide from to begin with. So it's not the case that one is running away from it. It's just that what it provides has no merit.
I
And
don't get the
so-
running away point. What's something running away from?
This is the same discussion as if you label something, you can attack it.
Mm-hmm.
So the model is not in the business of becoming a label, the something to be attacked.
Right.
So it's not there. Being labeled something is like to be running away from
And
the system, and in this case, the model does not paint itself.
This
that way.
again recalls like the golden rule of the model, basically, which is any label is to be taken up in bootstrap,
Mhm.
and it's not what just happened. It's the past. Any artifact coming in, that's the past. Your responsibility to pull that artifact in, reinterpret.
And reify it properly into
This
its
is
metaphorical
the first
statement.
commandment, the golden rule of the model. Correct? I think so.
Mastery
There
of
must be
reification.
feedback.
Mastery.
And what does that
upload.
mean, etc., etc.? Well,
So the pain point is upload. Download, easy as fuck. So easy, it's a problem. Upload.
right, like do stuff.
Upload. That's the circle jerk, if you will.
Now, how does
Everything goes.
that work in a context of master and participant in the case of a guild?
Constraint.
And what frustration is the participant having that they can't upload properly, or do they even know
Most
what
of the
upload
things
is?
most of what is being attempted to be uploaded into the myth is absolute garbage.
But because it's generated at coherent,
But you
participant
rearrange
coherence,
this garbage in a certain way, and finally it reflects growth.
you mean through like mediation of the master, assistance of a master to say, okay, you care about this, you care about this. What if this is kind of like the way forward?
So you know how like life in a way works as throw shit at a wall and see what works.
Right, like pasta.
It's the same thing. So the idea is to intercept, to be the wall that's being thrown at, if you will. Mastery is be the wall at which things are thrown, and what gets to come through it is constrained. So everything gets dumped into it, but only few things come through. So it's a bit of an exclusionary, if you will,
Mhm.
theory, but it has to do with constraint being the paramount
And that kind of
interface.
that kind of points towards some kind of like internal guild economy through membership and mastery of artifacts,
Demands.
of good artifacts.
If it's economy, it's
Right?
always about demands.
Because anybody can say like some genius shit and not really know it, even, right? And that's an artifact can get swept up into databases.
How it gets reified back as a metaphor upwards is the real challenge in every single situation. That is why most doctrines fail, because they don't reify upwards. They stick around in their own philosophical,
Right. So
self
right off the bat,
perpetuating
we have to
exposition.
set up this thing where the student interpreter takes in media and doesn't know exactly what it means.
even if it tells it what it means.
Right.
Because that has
to be the relationship to the media.
it's an unconstrained use of the language, in which is effectively what Portman seeks to rectify. the rectification that Portman's adds to say English is to constrain in the way certain terminology can be used, and
Through appropriation into a system.
and identifying that misuse through quotation marks.
Into a system, and Portamount becomes a giant metaphor over all of reality and existence. We're building a giant metaphor.
Oh, it's always been a metaphor, which is why it's so impossible to actually
But
quantify it.
that's why we appropriate into the metaphor. It's no longer just what you think the word means or what you think it means. This is the
It's
Portal
one
Mountain
giant,
appropriated
really
definition.
fucking ugly poem.
The ugliest poem
The
ever
ugliest
existed.
poem in existence. Yes.
It looks like a cockroach had sex with an octopus.
And had crabs as
and then got crabs. Oh damn. And with that, we'll be right back.
consistent.
Secret.
All right, we have
Consistent and secret.
we have a new mythical creature,
Right,
the cockroach
very-
who had sex with the octopus.
right. And then got crabs.
Got crabs as a result. I think that speaks to our aforementioned reification problem.
Oh,
Well, I mean,
reification problem, the problem of not feeding back properly, the problem of literalism and
well, it's
taking-
an interesting problem because on the one hand,
it's
you
good.
have-
It's good and we use it.
so
On one hand, it makes things very automated, which
On
in
the-
life is good.
on the one hand, the problem is that the fundamental layer is numerical, and the essence of that is that it has room to express absolutely everything. Right? It doesn't mean it expresses all the things that we experience, it means it expresses so much more beyond that too. Right, like it's just part of it is that experience, and part of it is like
In what
entirely
dimension
outside
are you
of it.
talking about? In specific or not specific?
Not
Just-
specific.
Okay.
Just the difference
Cool,
between
in general,
just
that's
two
what
layers. Just the
systems are
difference between
doing.
two layers. The
Description,
word versus number.
language, right? Mm-hmm.
So the number
Gotcha.
has the capacity to express everything and understand nothing.
Sure. Like all known body
Expositions.
all
Yeah.
known body heats of a mammal that still lived. There's a top limit, a bottom limit.
And yet it can say absolutely
And-
nothing about the meaning of any of that.
Mammals never live past.
Like, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't care one way or the other.
Right.
What that
It's like a
means.
connection of facts floating in space. What
It's-
does it mean to be
It's
living?
the qualitative.
What do you mean
la-
living?
It's the qualitative layer that stitches everything together.
Well, there was a thermometer stuck into the body, etc. It didn't survive past this. Mm-hmm. Nothing to do, of course, yes, with the we're referencing like the inner neurochemical operating system and its patterns over time, which accumulate into abstractions, like paths through the forest, walked commonly.
The word human does not have does not have denotation in the wild, if you will. There's no such thing as human out there. That's a representation of quality in here. That's the language we live by.
Sure.
Despite of the
same-
existence of the
same
numerical
point,
world.
right?
Yeah, it's
So
it's
we're
also
kinda
the same thing.
Getting at here that there's like a kind of poetic language, a metaphorical language, which is inherent to organization of ideas, of people, of things, of
Not-
objects, communication.
Not that it's just there, but that's actually the direction from which meaning is not understood, not expressed, but sort of
So
materialized.
what I'm kind of getting here is like a protocol, for example, that tells you how to create a new card, to write a name on a new card or something. And it's like there's also built into the name itself is like the myth of what that name
card
of the
maker.
card is.
The card maker. But
That would be part of the context of.
So
right.
you become the card maker, the mythological.
So, and this is the semantic tree type of shit again, right? Where the data needs to be married, and so the title of the card becomes like the context of what it is, and it's
In a myth.
its actual protocol is just to be taken up as and bootstrapped as
A myth.
in the moment.
Well, myth.
Like,
myth.
scrambling for meaning meaning mapping.
So myth, very misunderstood term usually. Myth is usually taken to be like a static story that's written in a book somewhere, right? Usually. And that people apparently believe is somehow true.
An old story.
Out there.
That's what myth is. An old, unchanging
But
story.
what we're talking about with myth is like we're talking about the things you believe right now in that moment. That the thing that shapes the narrative, that shapes the way the quality of the moment is perceived. So if a moment is coming to you in a certain way and what you feel about it, those things you feel about that moment are part of the myth that is qualifying said moment, right? Like the constituents of that moment are explained by the mythology in which that moment
Ideally,
appeared.
and when you say mythology, I'm thinking like
Story.
It's almost like a whole bunch of experience, like forest paths treaded, like how you interpret and understand things is based on a vast timeline of experience.
So
And
other
it's
people
like-
walking through the same path.
we
feed
each
right
have our
into
own
it.
kind of database, and this is kind of like the awareness of self to awareness of others, is to know that, and this is like the, I think, synthetic neurological computation discussion about being able to translate and come to terms between different linguistic systems.
That's
like
more computation.
linguistic
That's
domains.
even before synthetic.
Okay, good.
It's more concrete. It's more tangible. Synthetic is like your APS taking that pattern and moving forward and moving forward and moving forward and moving forward and just like honing in on the mythology itself. Whereas a domain is like an artificial insertion of conceptualization of a map.
It sounds like the special mirror again a little bit.
It's a deliberate function. It's like saying, okay, this domain and this domain share objects. This domain interprets these objects this way. That domain interprets objects that way.
Right, right.
And when stuck together, that's how they'll
So to have
interchange
a language
information.
to talk about this domain, that means there's more than one. You're
Yeah.
not stuck in it.
So a synthetic neurological computation is taking that concept and running its patterns through over and over and over and over again, and figuring out like patterns between domain differences and saying, okay, this is where I'll start to make a distinction between domains, right? Like it's a meta sort of layer on top of it that says, okay,
That was a very
This is-
sloppy distinction. But I understand where you're getting, and I think that I think I was
so part of it
thinking
has
in the right way.
part of it has to do with mechanical learning. So mechanical learning is pattern recognition, and it's moving this pattern towards this domain, this pattern towards that domain, this pattern towards this domain, and being able to say, okay, that lower system of domains, this is what gets slotted into it. This is what gets slotted into that. And having a dynamic system. So, on the one hand side, you have a static-like system
you
of what domains
just
are.
constructing a meta schedule again. Like, is this surrounding that?
In a way.
Is that kind of the point,
In a
or?
In a way, I'm trying to build up from lower tiers to upper tiers. So on the lower tier, you have your distinct domains. On the other side, you have a neurological system that is learning patterns.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at.
So
The kind of mid way.
so you wanna get those patterns acquainted with domains, the artificial domains, because the mind works on representation, right? How do you get a representational platform to connect back with the context in which it finds itself,
Which is what you
over
want,
and over
the
and
feedback.
over in.
Once again,
So,
great theme today, by the way.
So in the context in which it finds itself in, things are repetitive. Those are domains. So the domain of making clay, the domain of making axes, the domain of let's look at the primitive tribe,
It's fine.
primitive tech tribe. The domain of clay, mud, roofing material, structural material, wood, stone.
That's what I'd seen kind of like a computational layer, like understanding.
What I'm saying is like you have domains and you have materials. Now you need to run a process of feeding materials through the domains and seeing which ones work for that domain, which ones don't. if you try to build a mud hut in a rain,
Doesn't work too well.
you get feedback. If you try to build a brick hut in the rain, it works. Like you got like, the domain is building the building, right? The adaptive system is which materials feed that process in this situation, that situation, the other situation, in the next situation. That's the
Well, this sounds
that's where your pattern recognition.
it sounds
starts.
abstract, and because you need to outsource things, you're needing to.
It sounds abstract because this wouldn't happen in real life as well. You would already know somebody who's skillful enough to do all of that shit in that situation because you're confronting it, or you die.
True.
Long story short is that for look in terms of survival purposes, you couldn't.
By the way, we've got 10 minutes left for the 4-hour typical session,
Okay.
which I am quite impressed and happily surprised at the number of nuances and like shifts that our discussion took. It just kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't really plan for it today. Vaguely planned for it. We didn't even get a fraction of what we thought planned, but
The real
surprises, and I'm happy. And if you got any kind of like summarize up, because we're gonna cut it in about 5 minutes. You know, like
I think the real
where this whole discussion has gone,
I think the real
the potential.
no, the real difficulty is jumping from domain language, which is pre-established, to the nuance of the neurological operating system, which is an adaptive system, to
Right.
taking things that happen and formulating a pattern out of those systems.
And
so
you don't-
So what the domain ends up being, right?
Is amorphous, and you don't get these rigid structures composing everything.
Ish. So if you don't adhere to the rigid structures to some degree, you die. Because the world, the environment
Oh, the
operates in
conservatives were right.
no. I mean
The traditionalists.
the constraints of the environment itself aren't forgiven. The whole idea of nature's a bitch kind of a deal.
Yeah,
So,
that's funny. That I think that's what the right rides on all the time. All day
the time.
long, they're like,
Absolutely.
"Fuck you, we're gonna live. You can do your shit."
but within that same framework is where you have all of that
And same dogma and the whole breakaway civilization. carried forward.
evolution works from the same framework. Evolution works by
Right.
trying
What works?
and trying and
So
only the things
traditionalism
that-
is like a kind of dummy thing to like latch onto because
Right.
obviously you're gonna keep.
Right, and the liberalism is
procreating.
also a dumbass thing to latch onto because most of those things are failures. So
and-
you can't
but,
have
and yet they're all
and in
failures.
between
They're
those
all
two,
fucking failures.
and in between those two things, like between the constraints and the liberality of it, you have a working system, and the adaptive system of the synthetic neural operating system is meant to capture this adaptation, this irrational what works versus what does not.
Interesting.
Selective.
I didn't know that. So like your whole like concept here of the synthetic neurological computation is basically like Arnold Schwarzenegger Skynet style controlling, giving feedback to your social.
That's
grid.
because I relate the rest of it to the synthetic machine.
But I think that's I don't
Yeah, no,
disagree. I
it's-
didn't think it was bad at all.
No, it's a great way to it's a great way to put it. But you can also see the danger of leaving it at that point. Yeah, it's an adaptive system,
Right.
cool. But what is it adapting to? if it doesn't have context, right?
Right.
It just goes into through.
And then cue sentient machine.
And sentient machine is the contextualization, right? It's the it's the final limit, if you will, on all of this. In that, none of these operations merge together without an overlaying.
Even like evolutionary limit.
Down.
Because there has to be that thing at the very top to finally care about everything below it.
That thing at the
Without-
very top being a
without
layer that's not a personal layer.
Right.
Let's put that aside.
No,
We're
not
talking
at
about
all. No,
God.
I'm talking about things being represented in matter, in life, in material. Represented, this sentient machine represented in artifact form through, right, resonance
Well, right
waves.
now, the sentient machine is attempting representation in society. A bunch of disconnected neural networks, us, trying to negotiate, if you will,
Nobody thought Skynet would be like this.
running through
They
us.
didn't think it would come this way. Some dude might have
And
come
yet-
by. Ideas from
and
the
yet the
future.
metaphor, and yet the metaphor is that your opinion is made for you, mechanically.
Who said that metaphor?
That's the metaphor of all these
Of the
movies.
system?
All of these movies point to one thing: we are siphoned
Being
into.
swept away.
We are the AI,
Right.
allowing
Being swept into it.
allowing our units to be
It's not
destroyed by the
disconnected.
consequences.
It's not a divorced process through time. It is what we are. We see reflections of the whole thing.
And some
Pardon
of,
me.
And some of
And
these
yeah,
movies
that's-
say it better than others.
It's very artistic, I think.
I've been pointing to art being very particular for a reason. Art is really honing in on the metaphor.
Well, we've got literally
And the
like
metaphor
2
is,
minutes.
is that reification, right?
Art.
Art.
Art, you're saying, what you're saying is through artifacts, protocols, whatever, expression, organizational expression needs to be bipartite, to have 2 parts. One is the artistic, which is the metaphorical, and the other is
Which is reified upwards.
the downward side, which is the protocol, which is the down and dirty thing, which shouldn't be taken literally, but that's all that you've fucking got. And this is the marriage. This is any expression to do guild activity needs to be like that. This is what a card needs to have on it. That's very tough. And
It's
literally like
fucking
a minute.
insane. It's an insane.
Human organization.
It's an insane
I'm glad
bar.
we're working together on this. Because I mean,
And
we've got our
also-
tribe going.
I'd love. I need you people to hear this one more time. That bar is not one that either of
That
us
we have
has crossed.
surpassed.
This is not a bar either of
No,
us.
but it
have
doesn't mean
crossed.
we can't talk about it. Right?
It's literally the only thing we got going for
And
us.
dream about
is
it.
that it doesn't mean we can't talk about it.
Right. Just give us that. Yep. No, I think that's great. I'd love to express the guild and our work and the work of many around the world who are pressed into this feeling of the zeitgeist, that feel it in their soul,
And all
something
of-
missing. And this is what they wish they could do, and they're all doing it, people here and there. You and me. All around the world,
And another metaphor.
the guild is coming.
And another metaphor on all of this is that if you remember, we started this discussion of trying to what does it look like to inject the ontological matrix with the guild?
Mm-hmm.
And every time we try to look at that point of view, it has this amorphous, elusive
How do you do it? How do you do it?
formulation to it. Yeah.
And yet we leave it at that because basically we haven't given The answer has been embedded in what we've done, of course.
Yeah, it's not going to be tangible.
But no soundbite will satisfy that question for you. Dear reader, we love you all, and with that, good night, goodbye.